All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of XS Succeed. This is Gearface. I'm joined again by D. D, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
And today, I have the immense privilege and pleasure to be learning about Carmine, everybody's favorite character. Um, and on this episode of XS Succeed, we start with some disclaimers as always on this show, and I wanted to amend one of mine for this go round. So you'll excuse the interlude viewer. Disclaimer number one, as always, is that we play to win on this show, and we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. And the thing I normally say is if the lines of play that we describe don't sound fun to you, don't play those lines, and please play for fun because Exceed is fun, and you should play for fun. With Carmine in particular, that is something that we kind of have to insist upon. Um, Carmine is a character who, if you are playing him to win in a tournament, it is not in a tournament that is using a rule set that is sort of like community recognized at the moment. Carmine is banned from competition by most tournaments that have been run in the past year or so since his release, with the exception of tournaments that were explicitly designed for data testing on Carmine, I think. So please play Carmine for fun with a partner or a an opponent who knows what they're getting into. Um, don't operate heavy machinery after you use when you use Carmine, things like that. Always wear your safety glasses when playing Carmine, but play him for fun because he can be a fun character. Don't let the power level that we're about to be discussing dissuade you if you like the
Mhm,
character. Um,
Yeah, Carmine responsibly and Carmine with your opponent's consent.
yes, absolutely. Um, Various other disclaimers. I've got a big list of them over here. I'll put them in the video description later. Um, uh, Part two of the actual disclaimer is that we're going to be talking in pretty prescriptive terms on this show. And these are this is a line of play that D has provably seen work with Carmine. It is not the only way to play the character. If you think that we've underrepresented something, please let us know. Exceed is a flexible game and it's not a solved game. What D found and what other people have found with this character is that the line of play that we are describing is good, and good in a way that makes the rest of the game pretty difficult to play. So it might not be that we miss something about the character or the character's line of play. It might just be that if we get something wrong, please let us know.
Mhm,
Um, but yeah, that's the disclaimers out of the way. D, tell me about Carmine.
Cool. Well, so this is Carmine. Carmine, as I understand it, is a male character. First most
Mhm.
common misunderstanding about this character.
Yep.
He's from the setting of Undernight in Birth, um, which is a setting I don't understand a lot about, but it's very anime style as I understand it. So
Mhm.
it's a fighting game anime style fighting game.
Mhm.
And he is from season 6, as all Undernight characters in XP currently are. So he features a different set of normal boosts. These are not the 1 through 5 normal boosts. It's also not the Guilty or Strive normal boosts. They have different normal boosts.
Right.
Um, he also uses the trap mechanic. He's one of 3 characters in the game that uses that mechanic, which refers to a type of continuous boost that looks a little different. You see these little blue ones here. They've got a different icon and they have some special rules applying to them, which I will be talking about when we cover his mechanics. Um, what else? Oh, yeah. He also has a 1 gauge exceed cost and the ability to revert with this action. Add a card from hand to gauge to revert and take another action. Meaning
Right.
his kind of gauge economy is going to be a little different than a lot of characters because your exceed mode is not a big gauge sink. Um, it may be a thing that uses your gauge in an unusual way. This is usually the case in season 6, is that you are trying to set up on front side a gauge that you then actually implement in exceed mode. And he's no exception. It's a lot more of that present.
Yep.
Um, all right, let's see. First thing I'm going to talk about actually playing Carmine successfully is a skill that is an exceed fundamental that you can build with any character. But I think it's really, really important to play Carmine. This is the skill of looking at your hands and being able to determine what you can play that has a 0% chance of getting stunned.
Okay.
Yep. This is when you are at range 2 or 3, and all else being equal, you should know that a focus is not safe because the opponent can play spike.
Right.
You can just get stunned. Depending on the board state and everything else going on, if your opponent sets one card, maybe you can play a cross and you know you won't get stunned because you're speed 6 and they don't have any speed 6s. That's going to depend on the matchup. That's the problem with this skill, is that you will always have to look at everything in your opponent's kit to know for sure, for real, actually, is this safe, or do they have some random nonsense that I can't deal with? Because every character
Okay.
has random nonsense.
And
Uh,
sometimes that random nonsense can, like, we talk about sometimes, and we've used this term before, D, when we talk about Exceed characters, where we say that something is unbeatable. And frequently
yes.
that what we mean by that is unbeatable among the normals, or unbeatable with a caveat, unbeatable except by EX attacks or by character specific jank. Like when we say unbeatable, it usually means like pretty tough to beat. When
Hmm.
you're talking about unstunnable as Carmine, you are talking about like dictionary definition 1 unstunnable. In this
Yes.
position, you cannot be stunned. Not well, if they have EX cross, I guess get stunned. You're looking for like absolute safety.
Yes. I'm looking for the step beyond that where I say, right this moment in this game states, where we are on this turn with this cards in hand, with this gauge, with this discard pile, with and every other factor taken into account,
Right.
I need to play a thing that cannot be stunned.
Okay.
So heuristics are great for that first thing where you say, well, actually just quickly glance over and see printed 3 armor 3 guard, 2 armor 5 guard, 6 guard. Uh, these are really hard to stun because that's a lot of defense. They've got 6 or 7 defense. But you need to know when it is that it's possible for them to get stuns and
Right.
be careful about how you use them in those situations.
So do they have 2 copies of sweep still available that would let them hit
Hmm.
EX sweep? Do they have the ability to put action compression their way into bonus power and then play a 6 power move or something like that? So anything that
Hmm.
can change the board before you can react to it in a way that would make you get stunned, you need to know
Yep.
about. Got it.
Yeah, and EX Sweep is actually the perfect example here because it is something every character has.
Hmm.
And if you look at the board and you go, okay, my sweep can't be stunned, or my spin, or my give me that, the opponent still has 2 copies of sweep, then they can play an EX sweep, and you can be incredibly sad, the saddest boy ever. I say boy because you're playing Carmine, no comments about you.
Right.
Um, so the reason this is so important is because of how the trap mechanic works. So now let me talk about the mechanics.
Yep.
Right, so a trap is a continuous boost. You put it in your boost area, except you don't put it in your boost area. Uh, Part of the rules load of being a trap boost means that when you play it, you put it somewhere on the board, anywhere you want. Could be your space, could be the opponent's space, whatever. You stick it in
Right.
a space on the board.
Right.
Um, the other big part of the rules load for traps is if you're not stunned during a strike, then they are not going to be discarded at the end of that strike. Whereas typically, when you strike, all continuous boosts go away at the end of the strike. Traps
Right.
stick around. This is why that thing that I talked about was so important. Where you know, where in this situation, and Ryu initiates with a critical single card, and you go, oh, I happen to know that the fastest thing he could throw is speed 6.
Right.
Well, if you can play EX Cross from here, then you know that you will not be stunned during the strike, and that's a win for you.
Okay.
Because if you're not stunned, your traps don't go away. Um, Now, okay, the exact board state I just gave has another caveat, but I'll talk about how Carmine works later. Um, but anyway, so yeah, the number one thing that you care about as Carmine is keeping your setup,
Okay.
right? So when I've given people kind of shorthand for how to play Carmine, and I'll say this up front, right? If you have no traps in play, and your opponent strikes, then you should be wild swinging in all likelihood.
Okay.
And it's not because wild swinging is heuristically good. You should be wild swinging because you do not care about the strike. It is worth nothing to you.
Okay.
The only strikes you care about are the ones where you have a setup. As soon as you have a single trap on board, you need literally on board. You now need to make sure that you are getting value out of the strikes. Either you are maintaining your setup, so you're not getting stuns, so your trap stays in play, or you're doing some shenanigan that I'll talk about presently, where you convert your setup into your exceed setup. Um, I'll need to explain that, but or you are paying out and you're saying, okay, my setup is now actually hitting you. Um, often those second and third things go together. But to explain how they both work, now we'll talk about his traps. So we talked about traps. Let's talk about his traps.
Yep.
They're all the same, right? These are the same boost.
Yep. They're all dissolve.
Yep, they're all dissolved. Notably, he has 3 ultras, 4 specials. This is, a distribution that shows up a few places, like on Fight and a couple other season 6 characters.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, they all his ultras have the same boost, which gives your attack a before effect. If your range toward the opponent includes the space plus 0 to 1 range plus 2 power, and that's your gauge. This means, for example, well, actually, you know what? Why don't I just do this, just to be a little bit silly? Um, let's see, because it doesn't work. There we go. All right, cool. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Yeah. I might be really bad at math, but I think these both hit, right?
We got one,
So
two,
as a
three, and
yeah,
it's go ahead.
actually, let me do this one. This is gonna be the fun one. So this one or sweep, right? Which both have range 1 to 3. You go, okay, my range is 1 to 3, and I have 3 before effects, 3 different before effects, right? When you have multiple effects in the same timing, you choose the order they resolve in.
Right.
So let's say that we resolve this one first. Then you get +1 max range, +2 power down to your gauge. Cool. Our power is now, well, 8. I didn't want to have to track 2 numbers. Our power is now 8. Our range is now 1 to 4. Cool. Now we'll do this before effects. Our power is 10. Our range is 1 to 5.
Right.
And then this before effects. Our power is 12 and our range is 1 to 6. Cool. We hit.
Right. For 12.
For 12, yeah.
Yeah.
But the fun part here is when you can do things like this and say, all right, my opponent's at range 5. I've got 3 dissolves. I only need 2 of them, right? Because I only need range 1 to 5.
Right.
I'll trigger this before effects. Before, if your range for the opponent includes the space, it doesn't.
It doesn't, so I don't use it.
Yep. That does not go to my gauge.
It stays
That
on
does not give
board.
me the range, does not give me power.
Okay.
And then I trigger these 2. And so I'm hitting for 10. I'm getting my payout, but I'm also maintaining my setup.
Right. It's like a Rekka that you've put on the board. Like you're paying
Yeah.
to the with a Rekka you would pay like to get enough power, just enough to stun whatever guard they played. You're doing the same thing, but it's something that you've put down.
Hmm.
Gotcha.
Yep. Um, and 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 also this putting it from the board to the gauge is part of how your exceed mode works. I'm gonna have to again come back to that because now I need to talk about the janky side of this.
Okay.
Suppose we are, something like this, and you don't have any crosses, right? I gave that as like the easy one before, where you can play your EX cross and you know that you'll outspeed whatever and you can leave.
Right.
Instead, your hand has, some, let's like block and grasp and dive. Notably, from here, you're threatening a 7 power dive. That's nice.
Yep.
Well, if your opponent initiates at this range with something silly like a speed 6 attack, and you go, oh, well, you can block because you won't get stunned. And that's fine. But you can also play grasp. Because at speed 7, you take this off the board and you put it in your gauge. This is preserving your setup.
Oh.
It's not your favorite way of doing it, but you made sure this did not go to discard. You made sure that this will be around for you to use later.
Okay, so when you say setup, on the board is your preferred setup, but in
Mhm.
your gauge is like ancillary to it.
And yeah, it is about 2/3 to 3/4 the value of having it on the board.
Okay.
Um, and for one thing, the board is more immediately useful. You will need to have it on the board at some point to actually make them do the things that they do.
Right.
But on the board, they can be techs. On the board, your opponent could theoretically stun you. Right? On the board, there are ways for your opponent to interact with them. In the gauge, they are ammunition that you will use to put them on the board and then do something else useful later on.
Right.
Okay, I'm finally going to come back to.
And while they're in the gauge, they're not outside of
They're
very,
uninteractable.
very, very specific character effects. They're not interactable by the opponent.
Correct. I think there are
There's
2
like there's like
in the
two.
game.
Yeah. There's not a lot of ways for an opponent to strip cards from your gauge, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is
Um,
conceivably possible in some matchups, but
yep.
most of the
Oh,
time,
4, actually, now I think about it, but not ones where you get to choose what they discard, so if you have other gauge, then you still choose, but anyway.
Right, right,
Vast majority of the case, if it's in your gauge, it's safe.
right.
Um, alright, so I'm gonna finally I've said now a couple times, I'm gonna come back to that and explain it later. Let's explain why this is true. His Exceed ability gives him this action. So, action, play a Dissolve Boost from your gauge. Cool. If you did, advance retreat 1. Cool.
Okay.
I like that this is our dummy, by the way, because ability has a notable similarity.
Yeah,
Um,
these are uh, this one has a little bit more text on it, but they both involve you kind of playing footsies.
yeah, exactly. This makes you good at footsies, but also every time you take a footsie step, you are performing a turn of I'm boosting something really scary that you have to deal with.
Right.
Um, and then whenever your opponent does something, the hope is that either you've paid out, you've preserved on board, or in your worst case, right, you go, oh, okay, I'm going to pick this up, put it in gauge, and then later play it again and be able to move again.
Because you can still, there are some characters like Waldstein, for example, like when he strikes from gauge with his Exceed ability, that card is then sealed. But when
Mhm.
Carmine is doing this, he can still take what is on the board and like the ability to bank your setup for later is not on his character ability or his Exceed character ability. It's on the boost.
It's on the dissolve, yes.
Okay, so he can side agnostic. He can just say like, all right, nope, it's going over here.
Yep.
Okay,
Now, obviously, what he would prefer to do is he would like to hit you and do that.
right.
But if he's in a situation where he has to commit to, I'm either going to play a non-guaranteed attack that could pay this out and hit you, or something that is guaranteed to keep my setup safe, the majority of the time he will choose the latter.
Okay,
And I would like to say all the time, it's not quite all the time because a very skilled opponent may be able to press you into having to occasionally make choices. Um, but most of the time, what you want to be able to do is say, anything they can do to me, I can hit them back harder, and then I still get to keep this.
right. So you
Um,
would rather keep this above any other consideration, pretty much.
right, right. Like
Gotcha.
if I'm going, okay, I can play a thing that risks losing the strike, or I can guarantee that I lose the strike, but I get to keep my setup in my gauge.
You would prefer
Uh,
that.
keep the setup, 100%. Take the
Okay.
guarantee play.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
that's why I gave
so
the grasp example where I'm going, yeah, playing grasp at this range. I know I'm not doing anything. They're gonna do whatever they want. I might get hit by Metsu, Hadouken, or whatever,
right.
but
So,
I'm guaranteed this.
so
So that's what I care about.
to add a little bit of clarification to something that you said earlier about like don't get stunned, kind of priority one. So in Exceed, stuns can happen reactively, right? When if I grasp into Ryu's sweep, uh, and then he sweeps me back, I got my attack went off. I did my damage, I did my hit effect, I did my after, all that stuff, and then I got hit and grasp was stunned, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So this. Yeah.
and most of the time that doesn't matter at all. In some cases where stunning, order when something is checking whether something is stunned, then it matters very much. So my question was going to be, uh, how does that affect Carmine when you say don't get stunned by any at any cost? But if you have a setup in front of you and the card that you're playing can reach it at a high speed, you can kind of like panic bank your gauge, your setup before the stun happens, and then it's okay.
Yes. Because
Okay,
then you're getting stunned when you don't have a setup, and that's fine. Because when you don't
got
have a
it.
setup, you don't care what you lose. You don't care
Got
what
it.
you eat.
Okay,
Like fine.
so you can interrupt it the way that you would play swoop on Propeller Knight to dodge an attack. You can play a fast option that will hit your setup. Crucially, you need to be
Mhm.
able to get it off the board.
Right. Yeah. This
Um,
is not useful.
right, right.
This is
Okay, okay.
with grasp.
But sometimes, if you have two of them, now you can hit
Mhm.
all of it because they compound each other and you can get them all over to your gauge.
Yes, yeah. From here, you can play the grasp in the same situation and say, I'm going to do this one and then this one and then
Right.
keep my gauge.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So just the advice remains the same. Don't get stunned at any cost, but there is an asterisk next to that where if you can
Well, the
it
skill is know when you can play a thing that doesn't get stuns.
I
and
see.
then it's granted that you have that skill. You will be deciding when you play the thing that can't be stunned, or when you play the thing that eats your setup to your gauge.
Okay.
Because in many times in this situation, you will say, "Oh, I can play a sweep here." Well, okay, bad example. There we go. This situation.
Right.
Right, I can play a sweep here. It doesn't hit, but it can't get stunned. But if your opponent might hit you with something that's 7 power, then you need to now say, "I can't play sweep."
Right.
It like you have to be able to evaluate, is it possible this to get stunned? And if it is possible for you to get stunned, then you start to look at the other things that you can do and say, all right, how do I not get my traps discarded? Right.
How do I kind of hit the ejector seat on this and bank it
Yeah.
for later?
Yeah. I guess that might be the clearest thing actually. I should say it like this, right? Never allow your opponents to discard your traps by stunning you.
Got it.
Like that's the thing you care about with stun.
Right.
Um, if you manage to get them to your gauge before that, or if you don't have any on the board, you don't care that you are getting stunned, at least not any more than anybody else.
Right. Hence the wild swing advice when you don't have a setup.
Right.
Okay.
Um, that is correct. You generally don't want to play things from hands that are reliable if you don't have a setup to preserve, because you want to hold on to your reliable things for when you actually need to play things that win,
Right.
or
And
things that
that
are safe.
and that won't get stunned.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so the reason all those things are true about Carmine is because of how the dissolves work. Like they are traps, so you need to keep them around, or rather, so you value being able to keep them around. And then when you make use of them, or when you have to bank them, you do so by sticking them in gauge, so that then in exceed mode you can reuse them.
Got it.
Relatedly, this means you should expect to exceed at some point.
Okay.
I'm
Because
hitting that
because
advice way earlier
right.
than I
Because
would most characters.
you have 6 of these, but you might have a lot more if you exceed because then you can reuse them.
Exactly. Like you have
Okay.
a theoretically infinite number of dissolves as long as you keep actually restocking them in your gauge. Because in exceed mode, you play this, you move, next your opponent strikes, cool, it goes back here.
Right.
Next turn, you play it, you move, your opponent strikes, cool, it goes back here.
Right.
There's no reason you ever run out of them, um, with an asterisk. That you need to not get stunned. Your opponent needs to not have an unusually high abundance of shenanigans. I think there are 2 characters in the game with an extra copy of tech, but that they still only have 1 extra copy, so you still have
Yeah, you still
2 of
have
these.
at least a couple, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
like you still have your 8 dissolves.
right.
Um,
Ah,
guess I
okay.
should start talking
Yeah,
about the kit
yeah.
now.
We'll get there. But before you do, really quick. So
Yes, yes.
a couple questions about this line of play
Yeah,
that you're describing.
go for it.
So first of all, just we didn't even mention it, but you can do the Carmine shuffle on front side as well. Like that's not
Oh
just
yeah,
succeed
this
mode that you
this
can.
ability is strong.
Yeah, you can go back
This
and
ability
forth
is
and
good.
okay.
Yeah, because
Um,
this is I'm on the board. I have a Ryu ability that also moves my dissolve. So
right.
I can say, oh, let me just do this, and I'm still in a good position, and my opponent has to spend their turn doing something. Or you can do things where you say, I'm going to do this, and it turns on. Well, yep, we'll talk about
Also,
scissor cards later. But
all sorts of things that you can,
but
yeah.
this is a good ability. Like, don't discount this.
Okay. And so when you say that you should exceed at some point, I'm assuming that the advice on when to exceed is slightly dependent on what's happening. It's not like a totally flowchartable thing, but like you're looking for at least a couple things in your gauge, or maybe even just one thing in your gauge that you want to bring back, and you're looking for, I assume, when this ability is just more valuable than the front side ability.
So that's not strictly the case.
Okay.
So here, the main thing about when you need to decide to exceed is it's when you have a safe turn to do it is the biggest factor.
Okay.
This might seem strange, but this is because like the thing you're losing isn't really access to this ability, it's the turn. Because
Oh, you can
like every
revert.
scene 6 character, you can
Right.
revert without really losing an action. Add a card from your
Right.
hand to gauge and then take another action.
Right.
And now you do but since you will eventually want to be in exceed mode again later, it's not efficient to lose the turn you spent because the gauge is not that valuable to you.
Right. You'll need
So
another turn at some point
yeah,
to do it again.
yeah. So mostly the heuristic is like if I don't need to take this action immediately, and I think I'm gonna have some gauge, so I can take this action. That's great.
Right.
Like the earliest I would exceed is I have one gauge that is not an ultra, and I have a safe turn, and I have at least one ultra in hands.
Okay.
And then I say, okay, I'll spin that gauge. I'm in exceed mode, and now I will be able to play the ultra from hands and start recycling stuff.
And then you'll stay in exceed mode until you desperately need this ability again because you don't want to have to incur another turn penalty later to exceed a second time.
Right. Like
Got it.
Carmine in game is very much I am gonna be in exceed mode indefinitely because every dissolve that hits the board goes to gauge, and then I just put it back on the board and we rinse and repeat.
Right. Okay.
Like you theoretically should not need to revert. Um but yeah, if you run out of dissolves engage for some reason, right? If their opponent manages to knock them out, if they manage to stun you some way or another, then you can go, okay, well, I have nothing. My ability is blank, and the only reason to revert at that point is like you need a gauge for something, I guess. But the only yeah, that's really not going to happen because if you
Okay.
need the gauge, then you have an ultra, and if you have an ultra, you should just play the ultra.
Play the ultra as a
Like you play
boost.
the
Right.
boost.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Because then it can
So
go to
yeah,
gauge
like
later anyway.
yeah, like even if you run out of these resources, like your basic mode is not going to be amazingly useful unless you are exactly in the situation where you must have this ability right now,
Okay.
and at that point you can revert for that.
Okay.
But
And
yeah,
then
so generally
and
speaking,
and even
yeah, go ahead.
then, take that under advisement because when you revert, you will need to exceed again later, and that
Almost
requires a
certainly.
turn. Okay. So
Yeah,
that's a panic button to get out of a very specific setup.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And in the vast majority of cases, once you've exceeded, you should hope never to have to revert, and you should expect to exceed eventually. So I
Okay.
gave the earliest example, which is like almost no conditions are met. It's like you have a gauge, it's not an ultra. You have an ultra available.
Right.
That's the earliest. May not always be correct to exceed that early. I'm just saying, like, hitting those conditions, and I'll start to think about it.
Right.
Whereas most characters, that would be ridiculous. Where I'm like, you have no other gauge, you're super early game. But legitimately think about it, because if you have a turn like off where your opponent's not building up something stupid, and you can actually lose a turn to exceed, then yeah, do it. At
Yeah.
some point, you need to.
You might not have another turn, so
Hmm.
do it now while you can.
Yeah,
What is a more common setup to exceed? Like if things are you don't have that turn right away, and you're looking for kind of a more ideal setup. Is it really just like when you have a turn off, or are you just looking for
it it's
a
primarily when you have a turn off. What usually what but the more ideal, or I should say the more common case is where instead of I manage to exceed unusually early, or I have a turn off that's unusually safe, is the turn that I'm likely to exceed is the turn after I have paid out a setup. So we
okay,
had some sort of exchange where a bunch of stuff happens, and assuming very skilled play on my opponent's parts, they managed to hit me for a bunch, and I was forced to burn my setup to hit them for a bunch,
right,
right? So I ate 5 and they took 12, or something like that.
right.
And now this is all engage, and now I don't have any boost in hands. This is the point where I want to spend the attack that just hits in order to exceed, and now I have these available.
You have your
That's
bank of gauge. You didn't spend any gauge to exceed. I'm sorry, you didn't spend any
it's Infinity Ultras. It's
dissolves
Infinity Ultras.
to
Yeah,
exceed. I get you. Okay,
yeah. Like that's the usual case is that I hit with something that's not an ultra, banks a bunch of ultras, uh, and then probably in response to something they did, so that now it's my turn.
right. I want to
Mhm.
ask one more thing before we get into the kit
Go for
itself.
it.
So you mentioned just now a very skilled player can force you to pay out your setup to hit them.
Yes.
That isn't when the first lesson that we ever did was Akuma, right? And we were
Hmm.
talking in that lesson, in many lessons since this concept has come up, of like you are building up in order to pay out. With
Hmm.
Carmine, you will hit your opponent if they make you, it sounds like.
Yeah. So the reason that sounds weird is because the other side of the outcome is not as obvious. Whereas for most characters, like Akuma, right? If Akuma builds up too much, then oh, his opponent might be able to counter his setup. His opponent
They
might play their own
they
boost,
they empty cross at range 3 and uh okay, they didn't hit you, but you
but
lost
they wasted your setup.
all those boosts you put down.
Yeah, and that can't happen to you if you're playing properly
Right.
because these sustain. If you're not stunned, they're still here.
Okay.
Like they can't waste your setup, or at least they can't unless you make a mistake. Because if they empty cross out here, cool, these are still on the board,
These are still
and
here.
there's only going to be more of them. Like that, you have 12. Sorry, you have 12 actual dissolves in your kit, right?
Right.
Wait, oh no, hold on. Why am I bad at this? I can't do math. You have
Across reshuffles, you would have 6 twice, so 12.
that is 12.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Anytime,
Um,
D. This is what I bring to
yeah,
the table.
I'm like, what is 2 times 6? I don't know. I was getting like 14 or 8 or something. Anyway, um, it's been a day. All right, so
Of course.
you have a bunch of these, and of course, ideally, you have an infinite number of them because you just need one and then be in exceed mode and then you just play it forever.
You
But
play it forever, right?
but the point I'm actually making is that like if your opponent can't waste your setup, then you can just keep adding to it. You can put okay, now the question is how many actual cards? 6, yes? 3 times 2 is 6, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. On one
Um,
reshuffle, right? Yes. You only have 6 on the
yeah.
board.
So the number on the board you can have at once is 6.
Okay.
Which means that you have something that has range plus 0 to 6 and plus 12 power. Yes,
Yep.
we did.
Sure.
Yep, cool, thanks.
Yep.
Um, or I should say up to that amount because you will probably be activating them out of order.
And you can order them kind of however you want in order to preserve part of it if you need to, and Rekka
Yeah,
your way to killing them, and
yep,
while still maintaining a setup.
yeah. But yeah, if that happened, um, I have no idea what your opponent did. They left the table
Right.
and had like a cat playing their cards. I don't know.
Right.
Because how did you get 6 of them on the board without any disruption at all?
Right.
Um, like I can't actually fathom an opponent who could in 6 turns make a setup that's comparable to yours, even with 6 turns.
Right.
That it like because each of these individually is an incredibly strong boost.
Right. And
Plus, most opponents when they are making a setup know that it has to work for the next strike because it's going to go away
it's
afterward,
going to
and you
go
don't have
away.
that limitation.
So unlike Akuma, who has this, as you were saying, who has this hard limit of like, yeah, all right, I could get +3 speed and I could get double the power on it too, but man, that's a lot of value if I'm not totally sure. Carmine is like, if I'm not getting stunned and they're not making me pay out by striking into me with they're not making me hit them with careful play, as you were saying. I'm building up to build up because I can. And there isn't really there's not much more risk to it than there would be if I had just one of these down. I'm not,
Mhm.
it sounds like you're saying that Carmine has, like, he can't, like, overcommit to his setup because it is so
Well,
safe.
there is a caveat, which is that there is a certain in every season there's a boost that is designed to stop this from being perfectly safe. Um, in most of the seasons, it's called reading.
Okay.
In Strive, it's called scramble. It's a
Right.
different effect, but the idea being that you do not have perfect control over what you're going to play next
Right.
if this boost gets played. Your
Right.
opponent might be able to make you play a normal that they can beat, or in the case of Strive, they might be able to make you wild swing, and then your wild swing is unreliable.
Right.
So it is possible to overcommit in that you may have some exposure to risk from these effects.
Okay.
Um, Scramble is actually harder to protect yourself against most of the time. Whereas with reading, it is not unreasonable for you to actually just not have any normals that can lose a strike.
Right.
Um, because it's totally possible to be like in this situation and go, okay, well, as long as I got rid of my grasps and dives,
Right.
then every other normal will at least let me pick up my setup and hit them. And depending on the opponent you're fighting against, like that's enough,
Right.
right? Like a spike here hits
Yeah.
for 11 power.
Yes, it does.
Um, and it doesn't get stunned by Hadouken, which is not a normal, but it's a card I've referred to so many times this session, just because it's an iconic Ryu card, so I keep
Sure.
thinking about
Sure.
it.
Sure.
But yeah, like you're worried about them. Like, let's see, so following back on that, if we're actually playing Ryu and we say, okay, he's going to reading assault and play critical Hadouken, then you have a problem.
Okay.
But uh, and that means that usually is the third normal. Well, I'm kind of addicted to EX assault, but the third normal that I'm going to usually drop is assaults out of my dive and grasp and assault because these are your reading vulnerabilities.
These are the ones
Um,
that in in a setup like this one, or in many in many Carmine setups, you won't have the ability to bank your boosts into your gauge with them.
Yeah, like you are worried that you're like a dive here is really awkward where you have to go 1, 2, 3, pick this up, and then he hits you with a sweep and you lose 2 dissolves and that's awful. You don't
Right,
want that.
right.
Um, and then a grasp is, oh, I got hit and stunned and therefore I lost all of my dissolves, and that's incredibly awful.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
it's your range to the opponent. So if you land here, dive's range is 1, which is here and here. But towards
yes,
the opponent means you
the
only get this.
dissolve.
Gotcha.
Yes, yes. Oh
Okay.
yeah, sorry, I should have highlighted that earlier. But yes, that is important. That's yeah. Like the before effect part is useful because you can do things out of order to make the ranges work for you, but you have to know that it still only counts toward your opponent. So
You
dive
you can't
here
you can't you can't
doesn't
go backwards.
you can't go yeah, you can't calculate range away from them for the purpose of the dissolve effect because dissolve's effect explicitly says toward the
Right.
opponent.
Right.
Like as a general rule in Exceed, range is calculated in both directions, but this says towards the opponent.
But in the example earlier, and I'm sorry for spending so much time on,
Yeah,
on
yeah, go
rules
for it.
clarification, but
Yeah, we should.
in the example you said earlier when you were sweeping, in that case, all because it covered all three. So in that case,
Mhm.
you're just ordering the before triggers to go in the order you want them to. In this situation where you dove in, it literally doesn't hit some of them because of the wording on the dissolve boost.
Yeah, like you don't even have the option to pick some of them up.
Got it. Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you for that. Sorry for the
Yep.
the question.
No worries. So like if you had dive from here, right? Uh let's take a let's walk through another example here actually. So your opponent strikes from this range, and for some completely inscrutable reason, they play block. Um Dive can hit. You can say, all right, I'm going to do this one. So my range is 1 to 2.
Because you
And
can
now I
order
have a
your
7
you
power
you
attack.
can you can order your before effects so that you pick this up before you move.
Yes, you do this before effects,
Right.
and then these before effects so that they stay on the board.
Right.
Because now they're not in your range.
Right.
Or sorry, they're not in your range toward the opponent. They're not in
For
your
the
range toward the
opponent. Right. Okay.
yes. You also have the option of saying, all right, before advance 3, then trigger all of them. My entire setup stays. I'm not even hitting you.
It stays okay, and so it's just a null strike, and I didn't get stunned, and that's a win for me.
Yep. Like
Got
my
it.
opponent threw a block in their gauge at no cost. I don't care.
Got
Like,
it.
and then up next turn is probably something like the Carmine ability to do that, right? Like it's
Right.
whatever.
You
Um,
just shuffle back or something.
yeah.
So and all of this is option selecting because
Yes.
this is all after the strike is revealed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so option selecting is a reference to a fighting game term, and exceed it usually means that you are making decisions later than people are usually allowed to.
Right.
So after cards have been revealed during a strike, you are then deciding how to resolve things.
Right.
And that's the foundation of Carmine is like mechanically he only really works because of that. Is
Right.
that you after cards are revealed are choosing the order of your before effects.
Right. And
Um,
to a pretty uncommon, I mean, hopefully uncommon, a pretty unique degree, he has control over, or rather, I should say that the output of his ability to control his before effects is stronger than most characters' output of their ability to control their before effects.
Yeah, the reward is high. He also is more. He also tends to have more instances of this happen in a way that matters, just because two dissolves means he cares about the order that they resolve in.
Sure. Sure.
And for most characters, you're not going to be stacking two triggers in the same timing that care about the order of the resolution every other strike.
Yeah.
Whereas with
Particularly
Carmine, that
often.
really could be happening.
Right. Definitely. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Let me talk about the other outcome here, by the way, which is you can say before effects, before effects, before effects, and then you have an 11 power that they have to block.
Yep.
Um, but it costs your entire setup, so don't do that.
Right.
Um, because now your setup went to your gauge, and unless you're in exceed mode and ready to immediately start replaying it, that takes more turns to get back on board.
Right. And
So
and and they didn't make you spend that.
yes,
You
yeah,
could
that like
you you could just spend one in the first example, hit them for a little bit and maintain more of your setup, and you would generally prefer to do that.
yeah, like I would consider that to be optimal, right? You could pick
Okay.
up 3, you could pick up 2 by doing this and then this and then
Yep.
this and then this.
Yep.
You could pick up 0 and not hit at all. But I would say that generally you can say, all right, 7 power means you have to pay a force to not get stunned yourself, and then I still have 2 of these on board.
Right.
Like, yeah, we'll do this.
That seems fine. Okay.
Um, But yes, like maintaining some setup and then maintaining setup is your top priority. So you will often be paying out while also maintaining your setup, if you can. And then what your opponent is going to try to do is get you to only payouts where you don't get to maintain your setup.
You don't get to maintain
Uh,
anything because they've made you spend all of it somehow.
yes,
I
and if
gotcha.
they are, yeah, the reason they want to do that, by the way, is because that means by default that they win the next turn.
Right.
Because the next turn is a turn that you have already decided you don't care about.
Right. You're just gonna wild swing and they're gonna do something that actually advances their game plan.
Right. Like
Okay.
you've committed your payout to hit them for 12 and they've hit you for 5.
Right.
And then they strike and you wild swing and there's a good chance that they're hitting you for 6 and you're doing nothing.
Right.
And now, hey, you're only up by 1,
Right.
like
Okay.
net. Um so that's the reason they that's their expectation usually is like they are going to have to eat it at some point. But eating all of it at once means that they actually get a turn where they can play.
Right.
You don't want them to have that.
Right. I gotcha. Okay. So I think those are all my questions about the actual mechanics of the character. Thank you for that
Okay.
long diversion.
We'll
If
wait and
we
see if you have more after we talk about a certain attack here. But yeah, sorry, go on.
gotcha. All right. So yeah, no. Please feel free to jump into the kit itself now.
All right, so we'll talk first about his projectile. This has a before effect on it.
Okay.
So this card is the reason that one of the most common Carmine openers is dissolve here.
Okay.
Because if your opponent does anything, then you can reveal this, and they're probably slower than speed 6,
Yep.
and you can do sorry, you have 2 before effects. I've made a big point about this, right?
Right.
Trigger this one first. It is not in range of your attack toward your opponent because your range is 0 to 1.
Right.
Then trigger this one to calculate range from this one.
And so
You
you
hit
hit
at
you
range
hit
1.
them you hit them, but do not spend your boost.
Right.
Right.
That's like the default resolution. Now, if they have 3 guard and are going to come in and hit you afterwards, then instead you say, "Oh, well, then I will pick it up and hit you for 5, and
If
now
for
you're stunned, and I
five instead.
do
Right.
this."
Okay.
Yeah. That's your option select with this. That's this one card option select as long as you have a dissolve on board. Um, and then this also is kind of your security button where no matter what the range is, you have a card you can play. Because this works perfectly fine at range 8, right? As
Sure.
long as you have a dissolve.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, the fact that this is a before effect, and I'm going to make an explicit point here. The parentheses on say you will trigger that boost before effect. That's only true if you haven't already triggered it. Just to be clear. Um,
Oh, I see. Okay. So yeah, it's you already did it. It can't be triggered again. So you can maintain it that way. Okay.
right. They're both in the before timing. If you do this one first, then yes, now this is at range 0 from the range from the
0 to 1.
source of your attack for the
Right.
opponent.
I
So it is
gotcha.
in range. So you do trigger it. So now you pick it up.
Okay. And
Um,
I was about to ask whether this has any utility when your setups aren't on the board, and then it occurred to me that that's a very silly question to ask because the only time you'd be playing it is if you wild swing into it.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't care if you don't have a setup on the board. We are talking about it when he has setups on the board.
Yes.
Got it.
You did, yeah. If you don't have a setup on the board, also, we can look at this card as being a range 1, power 3, speed 6 with no other text on it, which is aggressively underwhelming.
Sure.
Um, it's not a good card.
Right.
And then in the case where you have a setup, it's amazing.
Yep.
So yeah, we essentially don't care about the other possible way to play the card, which is
Yep.
the wrong way to play the card.
Makes sense.
By the way, this is your secret 5th dissolve. This boost, which gives you a before effect that's a lot like the dissolves before effect, and also gives you some actual guard, so that if your opponent has a bunch of bonus power, you can throw that onto stuff that normally would have enough guard but actually doesn't.
Right.
Right? You're up against Soul, and you're like, huh, 6 doesn't feel so safe anymore.
Right. Yeah, he can
Um,
hit me for 8.
yeah, it's like he can alarmingly regularly go for 7 and 9 damage. I
Right.
guess I'll have +3 guard, and now I
Right.
feel much more comfortable.
And otherwise, you
Um,
would probably prefer to just play thrust because you're safe enough without the guard most of the time. So you play this boost when you need it, I assume.
yeah, you play this boost only when you need it. Like you have no dissolves, and you desperately need the range, and you know that they're going to be faster than you. And or more commonly, you play it because you really really need the +3 guard,
Right.
and your opponent is very close to you, and therefore you don't need the range advantage as much.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, the force cost is kind of real, but also kind of not. That's a great way to get a normal out of your hands.
Oh, sure.
Like,
Yeah, to
it's if you don't have
keep
normals, it
yourself
sucks.
safe
But
from reading. Right.
yeah, but look at force costs as ways to get rid of normals. Similarly, if you ever end up drawing, over hand size for end of turn, you are discarding normals because
Normals.
reading is the thing that can kill you.
And
Um,
specifically these normals, but kind of because these are the ones that are most vulnerable to being awkward. But any normal could be a target to reading, and therefore it's dangerous. But these are the ones that are like the most dangerous.
yeah, I mean, here's the order in which reading vulnerability exists as at by default. Dive is the most vulnerable to reading, then grasp. Grasp is something that at any range where the opponent can hit that isn't one, they
Right.
can make you play grasp. And
Right.
if you don't have dissolves available, then
Right.
grasp just whiffs, right?
Right.
Um, but yeah, these three have no guard, which is why they're the top three of the list.
Right.
Um, Dive, grasp, and assaults. Assaults is not like these are all pretty close together as far as how vulnerable they are. Um, but I do think dive is the most vulnerable, and then grasp and assault.
Right.
Spike has 4 guard, which is enough that if your opponent has decided they're going to break it, they can. They can break this with any assault, they can break it with dive, they can break it with any power bonus on most attacks. Uh, and spike is a somewhat unreliable attack to hit with, where at range 1, it can't hit even with dissolves,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like from here, it doesn't matter where your dissolves are or how many you have, spike doesn't hit.
Right.
So there's times where you can just get punished, where your opponent at range 1 read spike, plays sweep, you take 6, you're super sad.
Right.
That's the problem. Uh, Cross has no guard, which is a vulnerability, but Cross is fast, and that's generally enough to say. Sorry, it's fast with range 1 and 2, so that's generally enough to say a
You'll
dissolve in
have,
either of these spaces is going to get picked up.
you'll have something to be able to, if you need to, you can chain it down a little bit further as long as the dissolve has somewhere to go. So you can, it's better than
Right.
grasp in that way.
Yeah, like you're often going to be going to have a dissolve not at range. You're often going to be in a situation like this. You have
Right.
dissolve not at range 1,
Right.
and you're keeping your opponent at, well, not this, but yeah, like this.
Sure.
You're keeping your opponent a little bit more than arm's length away, by using your footsie's ability and such, and that's where cross is a totally viable threat, and grasp is a risk. Grasp is
Right.
liability.
Right. Okay.
Um, but yeah, if they're in your face, then cross is undercurve, and it is its own risk. So it has the same problem as spike in that regard. Like
Right.
these are kind of on the same level there. Then we get to sweep, which has 6 guard, which is less guard than EX sweep has power. So it is still
Yep.
stunnable by everybody in the game in theory.
Yep.
Um, and then focus, which the opponent has to have a power boost to break this. And depending on the character, that that may be easy, that may be extremely difficult.
Sure.
Yeah, like I think there is at least one, there might be more than one character in season 6 who just does not have any printed power boosts. And well, okay, but this you don't stun. But for most characters, with a little setup, they can threaten to stun it.
Sure.
Um, and then block, where exactly ignore armor is the thing that threatens to stun it, right? Um, so at range 1 or at range 4 plus, you can say my block is probably safe against anything that doesn't spike. But read their kit.
Sure.
You look through the kit and you go, oh, wild throw ignores armor, and it's 5 prints of power. I block is not safe.
Right.
Um, but yeah, but generally, it's the hardest thing for people to play a reading and stun unless they are making a hard call out.
Right. Okay.
Because if they're reading call, well, that's reading strats. That's not really character specific. But say if they're reading and call block, you go, oh, they want to stun block, and if you don't have the block, that gives you a lot of
You,
information about what they're playing.
sure. Yeah. And they are playing something that stuns block, which, as you just said, not a lot of things do. You're like, all right, well, check the kit. It's spike. I will play anything that beats spike, and there's plenty of things that beat spike, or dodge spike, which is fine for
Mhm,
you.
exactly.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, like these are harder to commit reading to because generally, if you're reading one of them, your opponent goes, "Oh, there's not many things that stun them, so you're playing one of those. So I'll play something that beats it."
Right. Got it. Got
Um,
it. Got it. Okay. Sorry for that detour.
no, that's fine. I mean, it does. You do need to think about what you're getting rid of to not be vulnerable to reading, because reading is how you lose games.
Right. Okay.
Like that's the thing that is the essence of your mortality. That is the
Sure.
thing that you were forced to drink as an infant. The reason you are not completely all powerful is because reading exists.
Reading and scramble
Uh,
exists.
Yep, and
What we're
scramble.
talking about, what we're
Yeah,
talking about here is reading. But yeah, okay, I got you.
yeah. Yeah, scramble is much harder for you to do things to defend against. That requires more general defense play, which is where you go, I want to be in a position where, regardless of what I wild swing, I still have a reasonable defensive setup, and
Right.
that's much harder to do.
That yeah.
Usually, what yeah
Now you're dealing with your whole deck.
yeah. Usually, if you're trying to deal with somebody with scramble, you go, well, I just need to commit smaller payouts, and you do one or two at a time, and you try to make them count because you don't want to commit a bunch and then have scramble kill you.
Got it. Okay.
Um, but that's kind of the general pattern, and that's a fine way to deal with reading. But reading is easier for you to play against because you can also deal with reading just by not having normals.
Sure. And you can discard them and this is back to the beginning
This
of
is how we started
this.
this.
Yeah.
Yes, is
Discard them
this
by
boost
force
or
costs.
change cards or walk action are things that say get rid of normals.
Yep. Got it. Okay.
All right. But yeah, so we talked about the magic thrust. This is a amazing attack that can threaten your opponent from anywhere on the board. And if they are like, oh no, I'm in range of this, I don't want to be threatened, I'm going to move away from it. Cool, you're Carmine. Just do this.
Right.
They're still threatened by it.
Just play your shuffle, and now you actually you've made more space.
Oh, sorry. This is my brain. There you go.
Right.
This.
Right. Yeah. But
This.
you are threatening thrust.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And ends that works even if they do a thing like retreat 2 spaces instead of only 1. Whatever will you do? Well, the same thing, because if you trigger these in the other order, then this is a 0 to 2.
It still hits, right?
Still hits just fine.
Right.
Yeah. So thrust is fantastic. It is board control. It is zoning. It is. I should say it is not itself much of a zoning tool. It is an anti-zoning tool that says this is probably stronger than your projectiles. You can't play projectile safely against me.
Right.
And what you want from this is to hold it so that your opponent has to worry about it all the time. To play it when it is the thing that shuts down a thing that they are dealing with, or that they are building up and threatening, because of its pretty good speed and range, combination. Or yeah, just to never use it. Like it's good in everything. Sorry, that thought was going somewhere else. I've lost it now.
All good.
See what is this card? Right. Yeah. You want them to be afraid of it. They are going to be afraid of it. You want it to manipulate their movements. Oh yeah, that's the main thing. Threatening this and forcing them to deal with it buys you time to draw through your deck and to create more setups. Drawing through your deck is not something that you necessarily care about, but you might, because it is entirely possible for, this was in your opening hands, and the other 5 dissolves are at the bottom of your deck.
At the bottom of your deck, sure.
Yep. I have had games where the first 14 cards in my deck had 0 dissolves in them. It is possible.
Yeah.
At that point, you're not playing Carmine.
And at that point, the only action you're taking basically is wild swinging when they strike into you and digging.
Yeah, yeah, and that is a decent way for you to lose the game, is you didn't manage to get to your dissolves fast enough, because without these, you're not playing Carmine.
Right.
You are not playing the character.
Gotcha.
Like, you are a character with mediocre cards and no ability and no board presence at that point. Speaking of mediocre cards,
excellent segue.
Thank you. Well, actually, no. Let's do it. I should do this in importance order, right? So I talked about thrust. It is staple, offense, defense, threat, setup, everything you want. Let's talk about the next best card, or next best special, spin. This is like sweep, but it's range 1 to 4. It has less power, but whatever. You're not lacking for power, and
it doesn't. You're Carmine.
Yeah, you can have as much power as you want. The nice thing about this is that at range 1, it means that Cross doesn't escape. Or sorry, range 2. Range 2, Cross doesn't escape because you have a dissolve in play.
Right.
Right. So it's a 1 to 5 with 6 power. That's fantastic. It also works as a slow projectile in its own right, where if your opponent wants to play projectile that beats thrust, it probably doesn't outtrade spin.
Right.
Because if they have something that's faster than speed 6 or faster, then it probably is not going to hit for enough to outtrade a slower spin.
Right. And certainly not enough to break it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, like at speed 6, you're probably not getting hit by a 7 power attack.
Right.
Let alone an ignore guard attack. That's not very likely. So generally you like spin for its value as a ranged attack. It's fine to use it close range as a substitute sweep if you don't have actual sweep. It has some funny properties because of its after effects. So this after is you may advance to any space in this attack's range. So because that says advance, right? Like from here, the entire board is in my range, but since it only allows me to advance, the only spaces I can go to are these three.
Right.
But I can also stay still because it says you may.
Okay.
Um,
You just can't go backwards.
yeah, you just can't go backwards. So you can't use this to retreat. It is still generally good at making space, though. This is a particularly useful property if you're cornered, where you go, oh, well, I had it dissolve up and I played this, so let's see, range 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm over here now. Bye.
Right.
Um, it's very, very funny to play this against things that gain advantage, where you say, okay, you can have the advantage, but I'm out. I've left,
I'm
and
as
now
far away as
and now it's
possible.
my advantage. I
Right.
stole it.
Right.
It's rude. But yeah, so good attack, lots of useful properties. Main one being guard, next one being range. The movement is make of it what you will. And the reason that you will not play this attack as often as you might expect, based on everything I've said, is because this boost is your secret fourth dissolve.
Okay.
Uh, you spend a life. What? Not actually spend a life. If you're at one life, then they take one non-lethal damage, which does nothing. But
Right.
in most cases, you're going to be taking you'll take one damage, right?
Yep. Yep.
Then you play a dissolve from your discard pile, and then you advance to retreat too. Which means, in the exact situation I just described, it's also great at getting out of the corner,
Mhm.
and you didn't have to, trade down for a strike to do it.
So that's one of the use
Uh,
cases of the attack on the boost itself. But
yep,
also you get to play your setup if you whiffed it somehow or if you got it stunned out.
yeah. Like if you don't have any dissolves from here, then rather than like play this and get out to a measly range 3 where they're still threatening you,
Right.
or whatever, you can bring back a dissolve that got in your discard pile and get out of dodge, which
And
is generally more useful.
and in terms of how your dissolves got into your discard pile in the first place, if they stunned you out, but also if you wild swung into one on a setup that you
Yes.
didn't care about, you would invalidate it and it would go to discard. Um,
Yep.
and then you get it back that way. Okay.
Yeah. So typically, the way a dissolve gets into your discard pile is they used parry if they have it. They used tech or tech hit, depending on which one they have, or ukemi, which is also tech.
Right.
Um, or you wild swung an ultra. And one of them is 1 gauge, but the other two are 3 gauge. In most cases, you're going to look at the board and go, oh, uh, this is going to get stuns, throw it away, keep going.
Right.
Or, oh, this would require me to discard 2 or 3 ultras from my gauge because that's what my gauge is.
No
And
way.
it's probably not worth it. Like,
Right.
yeah, I only say probably because of the text on this card, but we'll talk about the ultras later.
Sure.
Um, but yes, yeah, it's very common to invalidate these as wild swings, which is the half of how they'll get into your discard pile, the other half being parry or attack.
Right.
Um, but yes, and that's what this is for. Is like, oh, this is not an opening hands dissolve, but it is a dissolve that in the mid game once you actually have stuff starts to drop.
Sure. Makes
Um,
sense.
and then the extra movement is just parry on top, where if you need to escape the corner or just make extra space, you do that.
Right. Okay.
Um, yeah, so super super useful. All right. Which of these to talk about now? Well, yeah, give me that is probably give me that is definitely the next best attack. Um, it's weird. It's a command grab. So an exceed this generally means a mid speed that performs well against the staple defensive options of block, sweep, and or focus. Um, so this has hit gain 2 life on it and ignore armor. So it goes through the armor on block or focus, and it has effectively 5 power, uh, and then 3 armor, which is a total of 8, which is kind of a higher delta if we're referring to the total of damaged or effective damage and armor.
Right.
So it's great for trading. Um, it is speed 1, so it's not so great at like not trading. It's not going to outspeed and stun virtually anything except for maybe block, and that's if you are at range 1 and you have a dissolve and you're willing to consume it, then you have a 5 power, so it stuns block, but it still doesn't stun focus, so it's kind of meh.
Sure. Sure.
Um, yeah, the main value of this card is uh, I played this from hand or as a wild swing, but especially from hands when my opponent was playing literally anything and I had 3 armor. Cool. Um, I also had 3 guards, so if I have a setup, then I'm probably not stunned, right? Like
Right.
this is I'm spending less life to lose this strike than I otherwise would. Um, it's fine if I'm not hitting you. I
But
generally don't expect to hit you.
yeah, you're not this doesn't figure into your plans. In other
Yeah,
words, this
yeah.
is
This
something
attack
that
is not a game plan.
yeah, you
Mhm.
play when you have to or when you happen to.
Yeah, and you play it mostly to throw it away. You are happy to see it as a wild swing unless your opponent has more armor, because it means that you're losing by less than you otherwise would. And
Sure.
you'll play it from hand when you need 6 total defenses, 3 armor, 3 guards, to not get stuns, and then you're fine playing it whenever, and you're not really expecting to actually also hit with anything. We stand over here and you play it and you get hit by Hadouken and you're like, all right, cool, I'll take my 1 damage.
Right.
Now it's my turn. I'm going to do something better. Um, so its main purpose is you have a you have 3 points of armor on a card. Um, it is very good to hit with because gaining life, repositioning the opponent, maybe drag them past you into the corner so you can make more space, whatever. That's all great, but don't count on it.
Okay.
Um, it is super fun. I play this card more than I should, uh, or at least I used to. Then I discovered how much it annoyed people to play the boost. Um, so now I troll people with Blood Spike instead. Blood Spike. If the opponent is standing in a dissolve, so if they're in a dissolved space like this,
Yep.
uh, and that's the rest, and then the rest of the text. Meaning, by the way, if they're not in a dissolved space, this boost does nothing. Don't do it. Right, but if they're in a dissolved space, deal 2 damage, then push or pull 1, and then take another action. This is almost always going to be push.
Okay.
Where you say, you have moved closer to me. You are standing on this thing in my face. Cool. Take damage. Go away. Now it's my turn. I'm probably gonna do something like this. And now
Make
we're
more.
farther away, and also you have 2 less life.
Make more space. Right.
Yep. There is an extremely funny thing. This is the main reason that I do this to people because it annoys the heck out of them. It's also a good thing to do, by the way, where they are in your face and they have some sort of super range 1 attack that means that you aren't safe playing a focus here. And you go, cool, take 2 damage, boost the second copy, take 2
Yeah. Take
damage.
2 damage. Take another
And now,
action. Run away.
they've taken 4 damage, and now you're probably playing a cross that hits with 7 power at range 3.
Right.
And stocks all this, and now you
Now you're
win.
all the way over there. Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, so 2 give me that's in a row is especially nasty. But or sorry, 2 blood spikes in a row. But yeah, I love this boost. It annoys the heck out of people. It is also just kind of I dropped a card to do 2 damage and gain some space, and it didn't even cost me a turn.
Right.
That's high value. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's not high value. It's very efficient value. Like
Sure.
um, high value for cost, whatever you want to call that. It's very efficient.
Yep.
But yeah, so you'll happily play this attack when you just kind of need to throw out an attack that isn't super valuable. You'll happily play this boost when you have the occasion to do it. Um, that's that's about it. It's a good tool.
Makes sense.
Doesn't typically do a lot of what it does, but it does it really well.
Makes
It does it all
sense.
the time.
Okay.
All right, and now the least impressive attack in the kit, which is basically sweep, which is arguably the strongest normal.
Okay. Yeah. I.
uh,
Yeah. That's very sad, D.
All right, now that's not entirely fair because based on the way I was talking and I'm about to talk, you could reasonably say that Give Me That is less impressive as an attack. And that's mostly true because I don't play Give Me That for the attack. I play
Right.
it for armor or a boost. I don't play the attack.
Right.
But the attack from Give Me That is actually pretty insane because it has 8 delta.
8 delta. Sure.
Yeah, this is 2 armor, 5 guard, so it has focused defenses, 4 power, quote unquote, 4 points of power, so it doesn't do a lot of damage again as printed. But this hit effects means that its sweep except it gives you positioning like cross.
Yeah.
So, assuming your opponent does not play something like focus where they can't be pushed, in which case, okay, 2 dissolves means that this still stuns focus. But anyway, but yeah, you can push them out to range 4 or 5 where you're. Sorry, let me walk through this more explicitly. Right. These before effects increase your maximum range.
Mm-hmm.
This hit effect pushes until the opponent's at the maximum range. Combine these, and you are pushing them out to range 4 or 5 or greater, depending on how many dissolves you pick up.
Right.
That's fantastic, especially because this card with 2 armor, 5 guard is very often a reliable tool to play on defense when the opponent's initiating into your setup in some way. You're mostly worried about spike, right? Like if you get spiked, you're incredibly sad. So don't get spiked. If spike is not a threat because you're not at range 2 or 3, and the opponent doesn't have any analogs,
Right.
Things that are like spike at whatever range you're at, then you can play this, and now you have probably won the next 2 turns, or the next 2 strikes, right? Because you're trading up with this, and you're pushing them out to range whatever is more convenient for you. The way people usually mitigate this, by the way, if they specifically anticipate pulverize, is they can play a grasp and do this. and now you don't pick up any dissolves.
Oh, okay.
This is
And
this is still fine for you though, because now you push to range 3, and then on your next turn you do
you
this,
you
and now
shuffle
you're
back
still winning.
and do your whole thing. Okay.
Yep. But yes, but they, like, people can mitigate the potential payout of this card, and they often will because the worst case of this card is so unbelievably bad for most characters.
Right.
Um, so expect that and be fine with it because whatever they do, you had 2 armor and 4 power, and you probably traded up.
Yep.
Like, you're
And
fine.
so your worst case was not so bad as long as you didn't get stunned, and you probably won't. And their worst case was terrible.
Yep.
Got it.
Um,
Makes sense. Makes sense.
yep. All right. This boost is hilarious. This boost
Whoa.
effectively says advance 2, and then you draw for an turn.
Okay.
Um, there are rare cases where you might want to get closer to your opponent, but you are Carmine. You're a zoner. You are not a close range character in the least. Like you having looked at these cards and looked at this card, it should be very clear that range is not an issue for you.
Sure.
Um, you can easily become godlike at ranges 3 to 5, and if you're given time, you can become godlike at ranges up to 7, potentially 8. Usually 7 is about where the things practically cap out in my experience.
Right.
Um, but like if people give you enough time, then yeah, just throw 6 of these down, and now
Now,
have a sweep that destroys the worlds. Like
yeah,
it's done. Um,
it
so
hurts. It hurts your opponent in real life.
yeah, like it's world shattering.
Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, so range not being a factor for you, not being a thing you generally have to worry about because you can just have it,
Right.
uh, means like there's almost never a reason that you want to be advancing into your opponent's face.
Right.
Um, by the way this effect actually works can be a little bit misleading. If you were to pay, I don't know, 3 4 or 4 force, right? Uh, then we go, all right, advance 2. Then 4 force means one,
Right.
two, three,
Then you
four.
do the having fun yet. What is the name of that attack that?
The bu-
Uh,
Bug zapper.
yeah. Sure. Yeah. You.
You're thinking of Eternal Coils, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you just sort of or Dan's grasp, like you just jump back and forth across them
Yep.
rather than
Psycho
continuing to
Harigoshi.
advance. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, it loops. It does it that
Yeah.
many times.
So in situations where that actually might come up, if you're trying to make a ton of space on your opponent by advancing past them and then saying, "Ah, I will continue to pay force to continue advancing," that's not how this works.
Yes, yeah. It might look like you can say, "Oh, I'll advance 2 and then pay 4 force and make that a bunch more." And no, no.
Right. You will just
You go
play
ding,
you'll
1,
play
2,
I'm
3,
not
4.
touching you with your sibling or whatever. You won't run away from them.
Yes. Now that said, I have done that exactly once because I had three or four, three normals I think in my hand that I wanted to get rid of
Oh, you
without
need to
doing
get
change
rid of
cards or walk.
you need to this is another way to protect yourself against reading.
Yeah, it's a force cost, so you can
Right.
throw normals away.
Okay.
But that's very niche. Like that, usually you'll be throwing them away for other reasons.
Sure.
And yeah, but yeah. So usually what this says is advance 2, like in this situation. Cool. I'm out of the corner, and because you didn't have this, or you didn't have an ultra in your discard pile, or you didn't have respect, which is the advanced 3 normal.
Yep.
You know, like you didn't have a better way to do it, so you did this.
Right.
It's fine. In almost all cases, though, you'll pulverize is the card. This is not reckless run.
Okay.
Um,
Makes sense.
all right, ultras. All right, actually, wait. I'm going to start by talking about your best friend. It's these 2 words.
Stun
See them?
immunity. I sure do.
Yeah. So I talked a lot about the importance of not getting stunned or about being able to play things that are unstunnable or whatnot. Um, this is a card that says stun immunity.
Yep.
So you care about it. You care
Yep.
about it a lot. This notably also has some text on it that says that you can play this from the board. It says, when if you use this attack when it's in play as a trap boost, and then it calculates range from that space, which means that it's. I played this from hand and uh, I played this from hand instead of making this part of my setup. You just had a setup, and then you decided you needed the stun immunity, and so you converted your setup into an attack. Um, the
Oh,
reason that you Mhm.
okay. So this particular these boosts are the same. They're
Yes.
completely we don't care at all about which dissolve is on the board. Sometimes we might. because this dissolve says sometimes if I need it to be and I have 3 gauge, I can have stun immunity, and that incredible chess play that they made to stun me out when I didn't expect it isn't going to work because I have this as a backup.
Yes. Yeah,
Got it.
we care about this card. Not so much about these two, other than like every character cares about which cards they have access to in reshuffle, right?
Sure, sure.
Um, but this is a card that has properties when it's on the board that the others don't.
Right.
Um, and that's very important. By the way, full what's the word? Full disclosure? Yeah. The printed version of this does not have censorship.
Yeah,
I did that.
the name of this attack, you family friendly, this is the end, is does not appear on the cards in the printed version.
Yes, you will
It's
find that is not what the printed card says.
yeah, it's a different word.
Yes. I will leave that to the viewer's imagination. Anyway. But yeah, so stun immunity is fantastic. As for its properties as an attack, it's actually basically sweet.
Yep.
The reason I say that is because there we go. If you play this attack, it hits these 3 spaces, just like sweet.
It's like sweep. Sure.
Yep. Here it's worse. It hits these 2 spaces. And if they get past you somehow or another, it doesn't hit them because it only extends this direction.
Right.
Um, but for as far as like attack interactions, you mostly think of it as being a slow thing that isn't going to get stuns, and that's what you care about.
Right.
That second part especially.
And
If you have other, Mhm.
I was going to ask, I assume then that you would never play this from hand. You are playing this from the board if you're going to play it at all, and
If you can
because
help it,
right,
but if you need stun immunity and it's not on the board, then you play it
right,
from hand.
okay, I gotcha. And but if you don't need stun immunity, you have better uses for your gauge because your gauge is going to be mostly ultras.
Yes.
Okay, play this when you have to, not when you want to.
Yep.
Okay.
That's generally. Yeah. Now it is a potential win condition if where you go, man, I've got all this build up. Like my opponent isn't doing anything about it. What can I do that's particularly awesome? And you have 2 ultras that are great at that, and this is one of them. Just because it has 7 points of power, which is it's a nice number.
Sure.
But most of the time, yeah, this is a boost you want to be on the board so that it's an option. Opponents who like a skilled opponent is going to recognize that you have this option, and then like life is hard. They have to deal with it. They can't just play a thing, or rather, they will often be forced to play a thing that can either lose the game if you play this, or lose the strike if you play something else. And that's the mix up they're running.
Right.
And the worst case for you is you go, well, if my other thing is not going to get stunned, then I'll probably play that, and then it might cost me time because I ate my setup. Or if I'm not confident in that, then I'll play this, and it has 2 armor, so maybe they hit me with dive and I take 3 damage. Oh well,
Right. And
the rest of my setup is intact.
it cost me the
Mm.
gauge. Oh no, right. It cost you gauge, but not the rest of your setup. Okay.
Yeah, well, at least not necessarily.
Right.
It depends on where they are when your attack goes off.
Right.
Um, Something that I like to do with this is to like have it on the board, and then assuming that I can threaten it, mind you, assuming we're in the point of the game where I have 3 gauge that I'm willing to actually spend.
Right.
But yeah, so I have this on the board, and then I don't. Would you mind doing Control C, Control V, or whatever
Sure
your
thing.
relative shortcut is? Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. And there you go. So once I have 2 of these on the board, I can now threaten from either of them, meaning that there's nowhere they can move where I don't really have the option to play it in most cases.
Right.
And then any other dissolves that I pick up give me still the range option selects.
Oh, okay. So
Um,
you don't have to pick up all of them to do anything.
yeah, so like
Right.
I'm often going to want to do uh the thing I did before where I sequence them so that this one stays,
Right.
and this one would probably have to go depending on where they are. But yeah, the other thing that I like to do is to just start doing this. If you can back yourself against the corner deliberately, and then start throwing dissolves into the same space, then this attack becomes a board-wide unstunnable, like 13 power or so.
I did
Um,
not know that you could put them in the same space.
Printed range is 0 to 1.
Range is
0.
0, and
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing on trap boosts that say that the space that you're putting it in has to be unoccupied
Or not. Oh yeah, or not have another trap in
or
it.
not have
Yeah,
another trap boost on it. Okay.
yeah.
That's
That's correct.
fine.
You just do this.
Okay.
Yeah, and toward the opponent, by the way, like it if it from this thing is just going to work for your favor, where they're all range toward your opponent includes them, range
Right.
0
Right.
includes them, includes them. Like
Right.
this is a monster game ending attack if you want it.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, that's a I had 3 gauge and yeah, felt in it in half. And it has Sun immunity to boot. Um, do note though, if you do commit to something like that, then you're not going to be able to not pick them up because range 0 is going to include all of
Is
them.
going to include all of them. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter
Now the
how
flip
you order. It doesn't matter how you order your before triggers. Then.
correct. The
Right.
flip side of doing that, by the way, is all right. I'm playing this. I pick these up. Now I have 3 gauge again. If assuming I have at least one other card, then I can now play this
It's
next turn, and I
it's
have 3
it's
gauge,
back
and
again. I
yeah,
can do it again. Okay.
yeah. Or if I hit with this, then this goes to gauge, and now I can just do this, and I still have 3 gauge.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's just the Carmine Exceed mode properties where uh, you are replaying stuff from gauge and therefore never run out of the threat.
Right.
Um, anyway, so great attack. You will mostly use this for the stun immunity. Don't be afraid to crutch on that. Do be reluctant to spend ultras from your gauge on it. You would strongly prefer to throw normals and specials from your gauge. If you have ultras in gauge, you want them to be boost. You don't want them to be actual gauge,
Sure.
let alone force.
Sure. Sure.
Um, all right. Um, well, I guess having talked about one world shattering attack, let's talk about the other one. Um, this one is the fast one. So this is the slow one. This is the fast one.
Right.
It is also 3 gauge. And while this one has 7 printed power, this one has 7 to 9 effective printed power. Because you're going to probably pay 2 or 3 ultras out of the ultras that you pay on it. But before I talk about exactly that, actually, let me also mention that's an option select.
Yep. It sure is.
So we've got a gauge that looks something like this.
Sure. A mix of ultras and specials.
Yep. And your opponent at range, for the sake of argument, at range 2, you play this. If they reveal sweep, you go, that's sweep. That has 6 guard. I will pay 2 of these and 1 of these so that I have 7 power, which breaks sweep.
Right.
But if they revealed focus, you go, that has 2 armor, 5 guard. Now
Add one more. Sure.
I'll do this so that I have 9 power, which will break focus. Or if they played something slower than that, you just go, I only need the range to hit you, so I'll just spend 1 of them.
I'll just spend
and
one and then
do other
two
things.
two specials. Right.
Yeah, and beat your spike, right? 'Cause
Right.
your choice. That's awesome. Now it's only your choice if you actually have enough to make the choice. If your gauge is those 3 cards, it's not a choice.
Right.
And if it's these 3 cards, don't play this attack. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Why would that? Why would you care?
Yeah, like this attack is only going to be. It's only worth paying 3 gauge for if you can choose to make it something stupid by deciding how that 3 gauge shakes out.
Okay.
Like this can still be a good attack because it's a 1/3/6, but it's a 1/3/6 with 3 dissolves. Guess what? Every other card in the game is good when you have 3 dissolves. So
Right.
don't
Yeah.
worry about that.
It's not. There's nothing specific about this card. Grasp does the thing that you
Yeah,
just described there as
Grasp
well.
does this and better because Grasp is 3 gauge less expensive and 1 speed faster.
Right.
So yeah. But if you're playing this as an attack, you're doing it because you have probably at least 2 gauge, usually 3 that are ultras, and you can decide how many of them you're committing after reveal.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, very commonly I'll use this more often than the other one actually to end the game where I'm going, okay, I want to make sure that they can't initiate with something that is speed 6 or respond with something that is speed 7. Sorry, I'm saying this wrong. The fastest thing they could initiate with doesn't might outspeed this, so I'm going to initiate to make sure they can't. Right? I play this when I go, they only have 1 cross. If they initiate, they might hit me, but if I initiate, they're screwed. Or like out here or something. But I'll play this when I go, okay, it's time to kill them. I'm going to play a thing that's completely unbeatable, completely inescapable, and also has an amount of power that is whatever amount I need. Right. And then they flip block, and I go, okay, I lost 3 gauge and this from hands, and I'm a little sad.
Right, and but
I'm keeping all of this.
The rest of your setup is maintained. The gauge that you want is maintained.
Yeah, And
Right.
and depending on the opponent, you might just say, "Well, then I'll just do this anyway," and now you have to pay all your force to block. But I
Sure.
honestly think that's a bad idea against most characters because against most characters, if they blocked and lived, you are more hurt because you threw away, your character.
A lot, yeah, your actual ability to contest them at that point.
Yeah, like
Right.
you are relying on the one that you can now recycle,
Right.
instead of the 3 or 4 that you had access to. So
Right.
that's dangerous.
Okay.
But yeah, but it is good in the game. It is a very good. This is a fast button that does, an inhuman amount of damage. Like just die, I guess.
Right.
Um,
That's
don't yeah,
that actually sounds like the name of a Carmine attack too. Just
die, I
die, I
guess. That
guess.
sounds believable.
Oh
Yes,
yeah. Yeah,
that's very close to
his fifth special, just die, I guess.
feels that way.
Yeah.
That's the secret special that emerges when you have enough ultras on the board.
To play whatever you want.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Um, Yep. This might go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You should almost never play this at range 1 because it's under curve. Just
Right.
play it at range 2 or especially 3 where it's above curve and still does insane amounts of damage.
Right. When
Just
especially when you can key off all of your different setup opportunities to make it happen.
Yep. In a pinch, if you absolutely have to play it at close range, throw something on it so that you don't get stunned by grasp. But
Sure.
usually not going to be a thing you have to worry about.
Right. Okay.
All right. So those are our 2 world ending or world shattering ultras. Now let's talk about the best ultra. Maybe.
I was hoping that that was what you were going to say.
It's the utility ultra, but the
Right.
utility is fantastic. The problem with this card is that it is a fast that generally is not going to stun things that are slow. So in the exceed mix up triangle, fasts beat mid speeds, beat slows, depending on what you want to call them, pokes, counterattacks, whatever. But
Right. Right.
it's a fast button, it's a poke, and even with 2 dissolves, it doesn't stun sweep.
Yep.
Uh, Whereas almost anything you play does, right? Grasp, stun, sweep with 2 dissolves. This doesn't. It's the lowest power you have access to on any card.
Right.
Uh, that means that's dangerous. But if your opponent's not in range of sweep, because we're out here at range 4 or something, then you can be a lot more comfortable using this.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, the property it has that makes it awesome is this after effect, which says this turns into a trap boost and you gain advantage so that you have a setup and a turn and can keep playing.
Right.
The problem is that if you do this and your opponent plays a thing that's going to stun you afterwards, oh, sorry, let me be explicit. After, you may place this as a trap boost. So if we did that thing I showed a minute ago where your opponent played a sweep and you played this and they're going to stun you, choose not to make it a trap boost.
Right. It goes to gauge just like
Yeah, it'll
normal.
be in your gauge.
Yep.
Yeah, you pick all these up, you get the gauge. You do still have advantage. It says gain advantage. It does not say if you did gain
Oh
advantage,
yeah,
just
sure.
gain advantage.
It's a separate sentence.
Yeah, separate sentence. Full stop. So like you'll have advantage and you'll have all these, and that's acceptable.
Right.
It's just not what you would prefer.
Right.
Um, because the best case for this thing, the way that this is super useful is when they were, gearing up for uh something like this and decided to play their block. And so you played this and you have advantage, which means that their block gets way less value because they mitigate the payout, but it's still your turn that you still have this available to you.
Right. You
And
saw what
this is on
cards
the
they
board.
discarded if you care about that.
Yeah. But yeah, like the value of twist is this after effects.
Okay.
It you will usually need to hit with it because if you don't hit with it, you'll get stunned by whatever your opponent played. But that's the only reason you care about hitting with it. It's super low value to hit with.
Right.
This after is what you care about.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so its utility, the fact that it's low cost commitments, one gauge that often turns into a dissolve directly, is why this is often it's so often more relevant than the other ultras. It's like
Right.
this is stun immunity. It's the best that you can have. This wins the game when you play it, but it's really expensive.
Right.
This doesn't have any of those properties, but it's one gauge. And also, by the way, it's a DP. It's a reversal. It is a speed 7, where if you have no dissolves on the board, you can still play it on defense at range 2, and it's probably going to poke him.
Right.
And
It,
that itself is useful because you are
it's
converting.
it's an actual honest to goodness defensive option with no setup.
Right.
Right.
And the reason that even you care about that when normally you don't care about things is that we go, oh, what you're doing is you are spending this strike to convert a non-ultra engage to an ultra engage,
Right.
and that's good
Right.
because these are useful.
You would prefer, yeah. So even, and again, if they, it would be a mix-up normally if they aren't playing the 6-speed option and that you're trying to catch with a DP and they're playing sweep instead. Well, normally you'd be sad that you wasted your DP or didn't get full value out of your DP. In this case, just don't set it on the board and it goes to gauge.
Yeah, don't put it on the board. It goes to gauge. Yeah, like you should be expecting that when you play this attack, if you don't have a 3 dissolves out already,
Right.
or if you're not at a range where you know that you're safe anyway, you should be expecting that this is not really going to win you a strike. But if you have no setup, it is a perfectly acceptable way to say, I'm going to trade down. I'm going to lose this strike, but convert a non-ultra to an ultra. And then if you happen to win the strike, fine and good. But like, don't expect to win the strike. It's mostly going to be I'm either making use of a bunch of setup to create a consecutive turn setup that then will let me kill my opponent, or it is I have no setup and I want to do a little bit of work, and that's fine.
Makes
Like, that's
sense.
completely acceptable.
Okay.
All right.
And so that is the
Yeah,
kit
that's the kit.
then. Okay. So I guess so. The other two questions that I have before we get into
Mhm.
counterplay that we definitely need to discuss that. You
Mhm.
mentioned the normals mostly in the context of this is why they're dangerous, right? This is why they're scary to have.
Mhm.
In terms of actually playing normals as attacks, um, and you also mentioned that these ones are slightly awkward to play as attacks for reasons of for reasons of awkwardness
Yeah.
with your
The same
dissolves.
reason. Yeah, the same reason that they're dangerous for your opponent's reading for these
Right,
especially are the reasons
right.
that you're not as likely to play them as attacks.
But the other ones, you are like you could cash out. You could certainly cash out with sweep, but you could cash out at range with a spike or something. You could cash out with a focus or something. Could you talk a little bit about when you are using your normals actually as attacks versus when you're
Mhm.
boosting with them, or sort of
Sure.
like the economy of the normals a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so this is a boost that you care about because it's an advanced 3 boost, which means you can get out of the corner.
Right.
However, your footsies are already very good, which means that you often don't actually need it.
Okay.
Because if your opponent corners you at range 1, your Carmine, you can probably use one of your 2 abilities
Right.
and just get over them,
Right.
and then eventually start to kind of crawl your way out of there.
Right.
Um, except for the window of time at ranges 2 and 3 where you're worried about spike, for most of that, you will still have safe things you can play that you're not going to get stuns, and you're fine.
Sure.
So once you get here, then you can like boost your retreat 3 to skip that step where you don't
Right.
want to be at 2 or 3.
Right.
But yeah, so like respect is good, but it's not necessarily essential. Um, you will happily play a grasp in the situations where you needed that guarantee. So like for example, you know, your opponent initiates and you say, okay, I need to play a speed 7 because they could be playing cross.
Right.
Done.
Yep.
Um, Like the reason you don't play a slow thing here is because they could be playing Spike. They're playing Spike or Cross. They're playing a mix up. You don't participate in the mix up.
Right.
You play this and say I am going to be fast enough that I guarantee value out of this. And if they play a focus, oh well, I still got this.
And
Like I got what I care about.
I bank it engaged for later, and I'm a little bit sadder.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like it's not what I wanted, but they were going to do it eventually. Might as well be now. It's fine.
Okay. Makes sense.
So grasp is the I need a speed 7 button that will pick up a range 1 dissolve. Um, that is its job. Um, and hitting them also is nice, I guess. But it's mostly the speed 7 to pick a thing up, and then whether they're in range of it is less important to you.
Right.
Um, uh, Assaults is an occasional surprise play where you have the dissolve that is threatening like thrust or whatever, and you instead play an assault. The problem with assault is that without 2 dissolves, it's not going to stun, sweep, or focus.
Okay.
So generally, will play a dissolve play an assault in this situation where I have pick this up with this before effect, go here, pick this up with this before effect, hit for
Right.
8.
Right.
Like that's solid. I also am personally addicted to EX assaults, so I will find excuses to play it even when it's not correct. But
Sure. Sure.
generally
Sure.
speaking, like assault consumes a bunch of setup, for like not appreciably more reliable than most cards. The main thing it gives you is advantage. If you can stun focus with anything, then the only value assault gives you over anything else is that you have advantage.
Right.
That's non-trivial, but yeah, like it's how much work did it take to get here? How much of a surprise play was it? A lot of people are going to be able to say at range 4, like they have something that is as fast as that or faster.
Right.
Um, which, by the way, if they cross out, then you do the other thing we talked about, where you do uh, this before effect, then the assault before effect, then this before
And then
effect,
that one,
and
so
you
that
keep both of them.
you've preserved your setup and just moved. Right. Okay.
Yeah, like that's what you do if they nope out of it. But yeah, so I find assault like well, I find it fun to play, but I think it's probably not something that you need to use a lot of.
Right.
Um, uh, let's see. Spike is spike. So as you said, or as you mentioned when you mentioned range with it, the value of spike is that it's probably a range 2 to 5 or greater projectile that ignores armor and guard.
Right.
Um, that's great as long as they can't stun it. If
Right.
they have a 5 power or greater projectile that is as faster, sorry, or a speed 3 4 power that they could EX,
EX, of
then spike's
course.
not safe.
Right.
Like you do need to worry that your opponent could EX a thing that beats your thing, even if they couldn't have beaten it without EXing, because they could EX it. So be careful.
Right. Sure.
Um, but yeah, but Spike is also is often good at ending the game where your Ultra ran into a block, or your Ultra might run into a block, and so you just play a Spike that they can't do anything about anyway, and then they'll eat the 11 from the Spike. Um, so it's good for closing the game. You'll probably not use it a lot early game. EX Spike has 1 armor, 5 guard, so if you somehow run out of sweeps, focuses, pulverizes, give me that's, and spins, I guess you can play EX Spike.
Mhm.
But that's hard to do, is to run out of all those things.
Right.
Yeah, so when I'm Carmine, when I play Carmine, I virtually always play mix up, because it discards a normal, draws another card, and lets me strike, and also I get to move maybe. I say maybe because actually I will very commonly play mix up here, close 1, draw a card, and strike.
Right.
Um, because I have like a focus or a pulverize or whatever that I'm going to play at range 1. I'm perfectly happy being at range 1. I just want to not have this normal in my hand.
Right.
So mix up lets you replace it. Um, yeah, that's my use case for that. Cross is fantastic. Cross is so often a thing that you can play that will be faster than your opponent's thing that, much like Grasp, you'll use it to pick up your dissolves in a lot of situations. But with the extra little bit of range, it can often actually hit them.
Right.
Which is, an unexpected bonus that you're going to be hitting for 5 or 7 probably at range 3 or 4.
And
Um,
the number of times in this lesson, D, that you have just by like casually putting cards on the board to demonstrate some kind of setup or some kind of use case for all of this stuff, the number of times that you've had these 2 cards in this configuration versus the number of times you've had it in this configuration is pretty appreciably different. Like
mhm,
it seems like the extra range being able to hit a dissolve that is a little bit further out matters a lot for Cross.
mhm. Yeah, it very much does.
Okay.
You will, because your opponent is going to be trying to to outposition you, and you are going to be footseeing against them on either side.
Right.
You will very often be in situations where your dissolves are off by 1 from where you want to be. And what? Sorry, let me be clear. Um, right. So here, if you want this position, it's annoying to fix because you can't use this ability to make this position, because
Right.
if you use this ability, you have to move the
You
dissolve.
also have to move that, right.
Right, which means that generally you want to be able to, regardless of whatever the rest of the board state looks like, have something in your hand that you know will be faster when you have a range 1 dissolve,
Right.
and something in your hand that you know will be faster when you have a range 2 dissolve, and those are
Right.
grasp and cross respectively.
Right.
Like, those are their main duties, is to say, at range 2, I can play this and be sure that I'm picking up my dissolve.
Right.
Um, it's a harder to guarantee it with cross. Obviously, at range 2, cross is on curve. If you're playing grasp at range 3 or greater, it's significantly above curve. And you're going to play it in a situation where you don't necessarily need to hit if you just want to pick up your dissolve. But with cross, it's a lot more dangerous. Where like at range 3, this cross looks great until your opponent plays the X assaults. So I mostly want to play it in situations where I'm initiating, so I'm sure I'm safe against things like that. Responding against a single card, and I know they can't have a speed 6. Like I'm playing in cases where it's safe, which for cross will still happen decently often. Um, but yeah, I also love the other side of the card, though, I have to note, because Superior makes Thrust do all the jobs that Cross wanted to do better.
Right.
Not all the jobs, but it's like, okay, I need a card that's faster than them, Well, if I had EX Cross, then I would have a speed 7 thing that hits at this range, and that's the difference I needed. I needed a speed 7 instead of just a speed 6.
Right.
Okay, well, if you boost it, then I have this, with now that's a speed 7
Right.
that hits at the range that I need because I have a dissolve on the board, and it does, the same power, and I'm not so worried about it not having the after, because at this point, I'm probably just gonna stun them.
Right. You are going to
Um,
cash out as much as you need to stun them.
yeah, and if I can't stun them, then I'm picking up all my dissolves anyway, so whatever. Like, I'm
Right.
still getting my value.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so superior, like, the big drawback of superior being on cross is you can't superior cross without just throwing both your crosses anyway, right? Like, you can't EX cross without getting rid of superior and so forth.
Sure. Sure.
Um, as opposed to you can play 2 EX sweeps if you want, because you can superior sweep, superior sweep. You can't
Right.
superior cross, superior cross. Doesn't work that way. But
Right.
you can superior thrust, superior thrust.
Right. So
Um,
if you need the value or utility of EX cross twice, don't play cross even. Don't
don't play cross
play
even once.
even once. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
you use superior to have thrust. Superior is also great for the people who have excessive power. So characters like Sol and May, or a lot of other characters who just have
Right.
power bonuses where you go, okay, my focus wasn't safe. Now it is.
Now it is because it's 9
Now it
effective
is.
guard.
Yeah, it's like I needed one more armor, one more guard. Now I
Right.
have it.
Okay.
And so I use superior a lot. Like, I probably play cross and superior a comparable amount, but only because there are many board states in which responding to a strike with cross makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, like, crossing out is so often good for Carmine in particular, because of how he can pick up dissolves with it and still make distance and do all these things and buy time.
Right.
Um, but I think superior is the stronger play. Like, it's just that, like, if cross is the thing I have and it's the thing I need, then I'll play it, and that happens often enough that I play them about an equal number of times.
Makes sense.
Um, okay, now we're getting into the cards that are just always good.
Yep.
Sweep, it's sweep. I've talked about a lot of things in this kit by just describing them as being like sweep, or as good as sweep, or comparable to sweep, or
Right.
whatever. This is actually sweep.
Yep. It says so
Um,
on the card.
yeah, it's not like sweep, or rather, it is exactly as like sweep as sweep itself is.
Right.
It is arguably better at being like sweep than the other cards are.
Than any other card. Yeah.
Yep. The main property this gives it that the other cards don't have is that it has 6 printed power.
Mhm.
They don't. There's a reason they don't. That's a lot of printed power to have on a card that is this reliable. Um, it also makes the opponent discard a card, which, like, is nice. It's not a thing that you generally do, but you're like, okay, maybe you get some extra value of that. It's mostly just, I have more value out of hitting with this, so I don't want to miss with it.
Right.
Sweep is super punishing, right? It's the most punishing normal to get hit by, generally speaking.
Mhm.
Um, 6 power and a sweep effect, as I call this effect because it's on sweep,
Yep.
uh, is nasty. Also, with 1 dissolve, this is 8 power, which stuns
This.
every normal.
Yep.
Well, barring, I guess, block, but, like, okay. If I swept a card and you have to pay force to not get stunned by an 8 power attack, I'm still pretty happy there.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, but yeah, every non-EX normal suffers against a sweep with +2 power. It's real nasty. Also, the extra range means that it can start to catch cross at range 1, so
Cross.
that it's
Sure.
not beatable anymore. I've talked about being cornering yourself, and uncornering yourself, in part because, as a zoner, as a long range character, you will typically gravitate toward the corner as your opponent tries to keep you from getting out of range, like, so that you can't cross out.
Right.
But if you are cornered and your opponent is at not range of spike, then your sweeps and sweep likes start to look insanely good, because they aren't going to get stunned by anything, and they're going to have max range of 4 or greater, which means that they become, I hit most of or all of the board for most of or all of the damage.
All of your
Uh,
life. Right.
yep. Yeah, like, you can realistically land a 10 power sweep a couple times per game, if you are willing to corner yourself and, like, pay attention to the threat of spike, and it's like,
Right.
uh, and obviously more than that is even better, where, like, a 1 to 6 sweep, you can be at range 6, or sorry, you can be at range 5, and then footsie's back a little bit, and now you suddenly have this 1 to 6, 12/6,
Yep.
like, with 6 guard. What are they going to do? Um, the answer, by the way, is go to a range to threaten spike, because they know that's the only chance they have.
Yep. Yep. And
Like,
if they don't have it, they will pretend they do have it.
yes,
Right.
because they have to. They know that that's the thing.
Right.
They might also decide to threaten dive, whatever. Dive doesn't stun you, so you don't care.
Right.
You care about getting stunned. Anyway, so sweep's amazing. It's an attack. I gave exactly one example of when you might play this boost.
Yep.
Um, that
That
is not
that's
technically the only time, but it's probably the only time you would play the boost.
sure.
It's the I need exactly this boost right now. I need +3 armor and on my attack so that the only thing that's faster than it doesn't stun it.
Right.
And by the way, be very sure that they don't have EX grasp because 3 armor is not enough to not get stunned by EX grasp.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, so it's a niche boost. Um, it's yeah, it costs you a sweep and therefore is almost never worth using. But if you find that you have no other way to ensure that you aren't getting stunned in the next strike, okay, do it. Um, that's fine. Uh, yeah, that's just defense. Focus. It's kind of like sweet, but it's not sweet. Wants to be sweet. Could be like sweet. It isn't sweet.
If it had more of the word sweep on top of the card, it would be more like sweep. I gotta say.
It would be more like sweep. Yeah, look at your
Yeah.
sweep. Look back at me.
Look back at me.
All right. Sorry. Okay.
The sweep is
Uh,
now diamonds.
oh boy. All
Sorry
right.
for that ancient meme, everyone.
Yep. I'm dating myself
Yeah,
probably. Anyway.
we're old.
So focus. It is not sweet, but it's pretty good.
Yep.
Nice thing about focus is that it has 2 armor, 5 guard. This is a property that you don't have on your other normals. You do actually have it on one of your attacks, but that's because you're Carmine.
Yep.
This means that it doesn't get stunned by even your opponent's EX sweep. It's very, very hard to stun. That's what you care about when you play focus. It may incidentally be able to hit your opponent. That's nice, I guess.
That's like a cool bonus.
That's a cool bonus. And very often when you play it and it's unstunnable, it's also something that your opponent can't do anything about getting hit by.
Right.
In examples like this where you go, okay, they can play a cross, in which case they go out here and I pick this up and I took 1 damage and got an ultra in my gauge, and that was my worst case.
Yeah.
This is not a very bad worst case. Yeah, focus is so useful because of its defenses, despite you having so many redundant copies of things where it's like, yeah, you have this other thing that's basically focus.
Right.
That's okay. You still want to have actual
You
focus.
you still want focus for real, sure.
Yep. More of them is better. Like it's not a thing where the redundancy means that you could throw away one of them. It's the thing where you probably want all of them.
Right.
Because redundance, I'm not getting stunned, is how you play Carmine.
Right. Sure.
The can't be pushed or pulled is obviously that has its uses just as it does for every other character. It doesn't do anything particularly amazing for you because you're so good at footsies that if you're out of position, you can probably just fix it.
Right.
Veil Off is hard to play because it's unfocus. It's more playable for you than it is for a bunch of seasons of characters, in my opinion, because you do have the other focus in your kit, the Pulverize, but it's still hard to play. If I'm really gauge starved for whatever reason, then I'm willing to Veil Off so that I can, like, if I only have ultras in gauge and I need to be in Exceed mode, then Veil Off is the choice because I need to be in Exceed mode and I'm not throwing ultras out of my gauge without a reason.
Right.
Like, I don't want to spin an ultra to Exceed. I will if I have to, but I'd rather Veil Off than do that.
Right.
Block is block. Its main property is that you can often play it when nothing, like when focus is stunnable, but and the opponent doesn't ignore armor, then block is probably not stunnable.
Right. So that's your last ditch effort.
Yep. And then tech hit is there for when the opponent has a boost that you can't deal with, and that's actually not like the least common thing. If they have a very strong boost game, they're going to be boosting up speed and power and enough power boost, and you start to go, huh, 7 really wasn't enough defense, was it?
Right. I better get rid of that.
Yeah, so like you might use that. I think usually you will end up playing a block at some point where you just need to let them do whatever they want for a turn, and then you'll be able to have your setup next turn. Because important property of block for you, Carmine, is that it doesn't have a range. You will never sacrifice dissolves by playing block.
You'll never inadvertently pick up a dissolve, right?
Yep. And that is actually like notably useful. So between block and focus, there have been times that I will play the block instead of the focus because I want to be sure I don't pick up my dissolves.
Right. Okay.
That covers normal's usage, and it probably sounded a lot like what I was talking, like the general patterns of Carmine play, which is you care a lot about not getting stunned out of your dissolves. Well, there's a reason for that. That's the essence of Carmine is
right.
You are playing defensively to have, to preserve, and then to use your setup. And using it should also preserve it. Otherwise, you are like not going to make nearly as much mileage off them as you'd like.
Right. That makes sense. All right. So that is the kit then. And for the only other question I had was very briefly about economy. You mentioned again ditching cards, changing cards to get normals, and I assume you're not ever taking the move action. That's not what your force is for. You got enough of that. And when you are changing cards, it's to dig for ultras in particular. Once you have them, you're not really. It doesn't seem like you're very concerned about looking for answers. Everything becomes
Correct.
answers when you have dissolves.
Yeah, everything's a question, everything's an answer if you have dissolves. Like
Okay.
you're getting rid of normals to dig for ultras. Once you have ultras, you'll start to go through your deck really slowly
Okay.
because your turns are going to be I play an ultra from my hand, or I take an action that moves me one space, so I draw one card for in a turn.
Right.
Um, right, or that. There you go.
Right. Well,
Like
and
you
so
will start to go through your deck at a snail's pace, um, because you don't need to draw any more as long as you have ultras to play with.
right. Okay. That makes sense. Um all right. So at this point in the lesson, we talk about all the stuff that Carmine has done, and now we have to talk about what the opponent can do to stop Carmine. And I'm going to let
Mhm.
D cut me off right there because there's there's some relevant things that we can harken back to the beginning of the lesson about why Carmine is banned from competition here.
Yeah, a lot of characters can't.
Right.
Is the short of it.
Right.
That this is there are things you need in your kit in order to be able to actually do anything about this, because the optimal Carmine play is completely uninteractive, right? Everything I've described about Carmine has been you can make a guaranteed play. You can be absolutely certain. These are not terms I use on many other characters.
Right.
Um, at least not when I'm talking about securing like 11 power hits. I'm usually talking about, securing a transformation if I'm in
Right.
season two.
Right.
But like as
And
Carmine, you are, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was sorry to interrupt. Not just absolutely safe or absolutely guaranteed, but also like pretty consistently. Like sometimes you have a setup that is guaranteed to win a strike that took you 3 turns to set up, and they had plenty of opportunity to interrupt that setup along the way, and now that was your payout. Carmine has
Mhm.
that ability multiple times throughout a game and can sort of choose how much of it he needs, like different thresholds of safety than what we're normally used to talking about.
Yep. Yeah,
Right,
like, it's usually, like, you should be able to put down 1 dissolve and know that you're getting value out of it,
right.
unless they play tech, in which case, okay, that's 1 tech down,
That's
that was
one
going
tech
to
down.
happen.
I have more.
Like,
Right,
yeah, and then when you put the second one out, you should still know that you are guaranteed to get value out of them, and then at that point, if your opponent hasn't done anything about it, you can start putting more and know that every successive one is more guaranteed value,
right,
um, up until you start incurring, reading problems.
right,
Like, that's kind of that's a lot. That's a ridiculous amount to be able to guarantee, and that is realistically your game plan as Carmine. Does say a lot about like how strong this character can be. Now things that will let you deal with him, right? You want so earlier in this game or session, I was about to say game. Earlier we're not playing a game. We're talking a
no,
game.
yes,
Earlier today, I used the word command grab
mhm,
to refer to a thing at range 1 that beats the typical defensive options.
right,
Um, Give Me That is like pretty mediocre as a command grab, but there are other characters who have considerably more threatening command grabs. Things that say things like ignore armor, ignore guard at range 1,
mhm,
that are speed 3 or higher, for example. That sort of thing is a problem for Carmine, where you sit there and you go, okay, 90% of your options that would otherwise be completely safe and completely unstunnable, that are block, focus, sweep, pulverize, spin, and your own give me that, I can stun.
yeah,
Um, like if you have command grabs in your kits, or in particular range 1 ignore guard, that has at least 4 power on it, right? Or ignore armor and guard with at least 3 power on it. That's fine too. Or sorry, with at least 1. If you ignore armor and guard, you don't care how much power it is. That's
right,
brain. But yeah, it's like ignore guard with at least 4 power so that it can break. Give me that. Or ignore armor and guard with any amount of power. These are things where Carmine might eventually have to participate in mix-ups, which is the last thing he wants.
right. He doesn't want to.
Um,
He doesn't want to make you. He doesn't want to give you agency.
right. So like and if you have those, be careful using them, because if you use all of the ones you have, now Carmine is unstoppable.
Right,
You need to ration them. You need to make him play cautiously against them so that you can then use everything else in your kit to its maximum potential.
Right.
Use the things Carmine doesn't have. Use your parries. Use your speed boosts. Use your well, he has power boost, but use your power boost anyway.
Right.
Um, and put up as much of a fight as you can while holding the threat of that mix up. And then, of course, at pivotal moments, you will eventually have to sometimes actually play those cards. And the first copy is fine, but the second copy is very risky because once second copy is down, he's going to have free reign to be unstunnable for a while.
Right.
Like get as much value as you can. Um, the next thing, that's very character specific. There is a thing that I mentioned also that is like a general thing you can do against Carmine, where after he has blown a payout, as long as he didn't gain advantage off it, you have this sweet, precious moment where it's your turn and nothing's on the board. Okay, like beat the heck out of him. He's almost certainly wild swinging.
Right.
Maybe you're a Ryu and you can advantage chain him for 30 life. This does not usually happen with Ryu, but it's technically possible if I recall
Yep.
correctly.
Yep. He's got
Um,
enough power and advantage to not give Carmine a turn for 30 life if he's got the exact perfect hand.
yes, like it's technically possible for
Yeah.
most characters. It's still nice to have advantage. This moment when Carmine has nothing left on board is actually a pretty fine time to play things like Assault, where the Assault is just too slow and doesn't do enough damage whenever Carmine has a setup because he's just
Right.
never going to choose to lose to it. But this
Right.
is a perfectly time to play things like Assault that gain advantage, play any other tools in your kit that gain advantage. Um, the more of those you have, and then the more of those you have that have non-trivial power, the better you can perform.
Right.
Um, like I have seen the Noelle Carmine matchup. Noelle's an advantage chainer.
Mhm.
Noelle does not have the damage, and she does not really have the footsies, unfortunately. But when if she gets a stun and then goes into an advantage chain, then she probably does win those next 3 turns.
Right.
Um, it's just that she's probably winning them for 12 damage, which is what Carmine wins off of like one
Off of
strike once he's
one,
done his
and
setup.
that's not enough.
Yeah, like
Okay.
it's not really enough. Also, Noelle does not ignore armor easily, which is unfortunate. Because he's got a bunch of armor.
Yeah.
But anyway, so like you like to have command grabs, so especially range one ignore guard. You want to have advantage chaining, especially. Action compression is also fine, but it's less useful unless you have some particular jank. So you like things like range based dodges, where you can say, oh, now I dodge attacks at range 4 or greater, and like the Carmine is going to go, okay, well, I'm going to now set up my assault that hits for 1,000,000 damage, but that gives you a better chance at being able to cross out of it, which Sax is set up for a few turns, right? Like it
Sure.
gives you more options. It gives you a way to not just die.
Yeah, and
Um,
as you're talking about this stuff, D, like a lot of times when we talk about counterplay to a character, you say like this character has difficulty dealing with stat boosts or something. The way that you're talking about Carmine's weaknesses is that this is what the opponent needs to have as like a price of admission. Like
right. Yeah.
if they have this, then they're allowed to play against him. Not that they have like a winning matchup, like just that they might be able to deal with him.
Yeah. Now I think that's generally true. There is an important caveat I should mention. Carmine is capable of bricking, of being a character that just doesn't function.
Mm,
As I mentioned before, I have played a game where all of my dissolves were in the bottom 16 cards of my deck, all six.
right,
Um, and if I recall correctly, I lost that game. I know that I lost the first half of it for sure.
right,
Because for 14 cards, I'm not playing Carmine. I'm
right.
just getting beaten up. My opponent has a lot of time to do as much as they want, and that's enough time for at least a certain number of characters to just kill you.
Yeah,
Um, like you may well die before you see your 15th card against various characters. There is enough power in a lot of kits to do that. Characters like Mei, Soul, Equus. Heck, Ryu does have the power for it. He can do it.
right,
He usually doesn't like go that aggressively, but he definitely can.
right.
Um, related to that, by the way, if you have a lot of power, and I mean like consistent +2 power on top of whatever other high power printed cards you have in your kit,
Right.
that can usually do the job of a command grab. Where the important part of it is that Carmine knows he can't safely play 7 defense and just be fine. He can't safely play 6 defense and be fine. You go, oh, I'm throwing +2 power and strike at you every single turn, and eventually Carmine has to participate in mix-ups.
Yeah.
Um, which again, last thing he wants.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah, but yeah, like the caveat of Carmine can brick. He is mortal. Like he if he doesn't get his dissolves, then you're playing a pretty underwhelming character, and you can kill him. You just have to do it very very fast.
And
Um,
any opponent who sees Carmine bricking that is their chance and they know it's their chance. So even though Ryu might not play that aggressively, if he sees a Carmine who seems to not be able to put dissolves on the board, he's gonna play that aggressively.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
If after Carmine's first turn there is not a dissolve on the board, rush him down.
Okay.
like if he does not play a dissolve turn 1, then he almost certainly does not have one in hand because there is no reason I can think of that he wouldn't.
Right.
Um, like you that means that he had a bad opening hands, and if he didn't play dissolve and didn't also like change cards 5, then I don't know what he's thinking, and you should kill him.
Right. Okay.
Um, like he needs to be getting his dissolves because he's not playing until he has them. Once he's playing, you're in for a bad time. Like, um, this also does mean, by the way, that I gave the extreme example because it actually freaking happened, where no dissolves in top 14 cards. But if he only has 2 dissolves in his top 14 cards, you have 2 copies of tech.
Yep.
Use them, right? Like you can his first 2 dissolves you can stave off. And not even necessarily the first 2, but usually you want to do the first 2 because if he gets 1 engaged, then eventually it's going to be an infinite number of dissolves.
Right.
But yeah, like you can deal with the first 2, sort of. Like he's going to have more, and he's going to have the boost on spin. What was it called again? Rainblood. There you go. Rainblood. But like he has those. You can't do anything about it. If he doesn't draw them, then you buy yourself a window of time in which you can do whatever you want to him, and that's great.
Right.
But yeah, so those are the general things where any character can have a chance. Any character can beat Carmine. It mostly like relies on bad luck on Carmine's end for that to be true. The characters who have a better chance that don't need to rely on Carmine bricking are you need to have like a command grab or very consistent bonus power so that he can't reliably defend against you and know that he's not getting stuns.
Right.
Like you need to have some kind of tool like that. So especially range one ignore guard or very consistent +2 power are things where now he can't just be safe all the time. You also want to have either some kind of odd specific jank. I mentioned like range-based dodges. These aren't the most useful, but they tend to buy you some time. Action compression and or movement option selects inside of strikes are really useful. So when I say movement option selects inside of strikes, I mean movement effects on attacks or on boosts that apply to your attacks, which give you choices in how you move. That happen during the before hit or after timings, meaning that you will be deciding them during strike resolution.
Right. So,
So
something like Chip's character ability, maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So like
Okay.
Chip's character ability, the Tempest Flying Squirrel Jitsu on in Bang's kits, things that are I'm choosing how to change the board state in the middle of the strike to make sure that I'm doing whatever I need to do about his dissolves at this exact moment.
Right. Right.
So like characters who cross up a bunch also have a slight advantage in that regard, although they usually don't have as much control over it. But like Kimmy is actually, in my experience, an obnoxious matchup for Carmine. I'm not sure I would say that she's favorite, but it's obnoxious because she is often going to be on the wrong side from his dissolves, and she has range-based dodges that she can use really easily, and she has a command grab, a range 1 to 4, if I recall correctly, ignore guard attack.
In Cannonball.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. It's like, note the number of things that I was describing that you need that she has. The thing that
Yep.
she doesn't really have is power, and her small scale footsies are a little underwhelming.
Right.
Where dealing with this thing is kind of annoying for her. But yeah, like she has a bunch of those tools, and also she will tend to cross up, which means that it's easier for her to mess up Carmine's positioning. But yeah, large scale out of combat movements, action compression applying to that, and then option selecting movements in strikes. But I still think the most important thing is I have a way to play a card that says your focus isn't safe, your sweep isn't safe, your pulverize isn't safe, your give me that isn't safe.
Just
Like here it,
to make
yeah,
him take pause a little bit and not have the comfort of having a completely safe option.
right. Like as long as you're holding that, he's participating in a mix up,
Right.
and it's a costly mix up for you to play in because you are the one who will have to evaluate when do I think he's just going to play the thing and hope I don't play it. And especially if you only ignore guard and not armor, that means that what Carmine will usually do, so here's the counterplay to that, right? Is that if you don't ignore armor at range 1, he's going to be playing to give me that at range 1 and say, okay, I'm willing to lose 1 dissolve, like, and get stuns, uh, as long as I only took 1 damage. It's not what he wants. He obviously doesn't want to lose any dissolves. But if he doesn't
Right.
have a choice between, like, if he has to participate in a mix-up, he will still try not to. He will still say, okay, I'll play this, which the way that it loses is the least costly of the different things that I could do.
Right.
It's my most reliable, defensive option here. He'll still tend to play his armor at close range because the armor you don't ignore, so he's not going to lose super hard. Um, Once he has already played some of his armor, once the give me that pulverized focus and some combination are starting to drop into discards, then he's likely to feel the pressure to make a call out where he's like, okay, at some point in here, I need to say I'm going to play a fast thing at range 1. Um, oh, by the way, I don't know if I made this explicit, so I will. If he has no setup, don't use these tools. Don't
Right.
use your command grab if he has no setup. It's not worth it.
Right. Yeah. You need that that's your silver bullet. You need that
Yeah,
specifically for when he feels safe, and he doesn't feel safe anyway when he doesn't have a setup.
yeah. When he has no setup, that's when every character in the game should be trying to beat up on him.
Right.
When he has a setup, that's when you need to use your silver bullet that not everybody necessarily has.
Right.
Um, uh, let's see. Anything else? Yeah, like consistent power is useful, but it's more important to have a command grab, which doesn't have to be range 1. It's just range 1 is very, very useful to include. It needs to be something that's makes him unsafe at a range where he normally would be safe, which means that a range like 4 plus, reasonably fast projectile that does this job, which there's only a couple in the game that are actually solidly able to stun 5 or higher guard at range 4 or greater, or the far more common and I think far more threatening range 1, I ignore guard.
Right.
Probably not armor, but at least guard. Um, there are also some useful things you can do where if you manage to see a setup coming, where it's, you know, he has stacked a bunch of things and he's going to play this is the ends. Like you can mitigate your losses. Like how do I put this? Crossing and blocking at the right time so that he puts stuff in his gauge for less value than he would prefer because he didn't have a choice about things being in range of his attack
Right.
is a way that you can get him to waste his setup so that the next turn you get to play.
You have
Um,
that you forced your way into having that limited window where you can aggress into him.
yeah, like
Okay.
it's hard to do that because typically the only way to convince him to make that kind of play is for you to initiate. And if you initiate, he has the next turn. And if he has the next turn, he's making a setup again.
Right.
Um, so it's easier said than done. But yeah, the windows of opportunity you're looking for are after his setup has left the board and you have a turn. Those are precious moments. You care about them dearly.
Yep.
Um, yeah. Let's see. Anything else on that? Oh, and this was made explicit when talking about Carmine. But if you're playing against Carmine, Scramble and Reading are your friends. They're
Yes.
your deep, most devoted compatriots. They will give their lives for you. Treat them well. Um,
Don't dive into Carmine if that's where your
oh,
reading
gracious
is,
no.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
gracious no. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't play this as an attack.
Yeah. I honestly like for
Yeah.
tech or for reading, no matter what season you're in, like don't
True,
give
yeah.
up those things that you
If this
need.
has tech if this is tech group chemi, boost it. If it is reading, boost it. So I
Right.
guess no matter what season you're in, as of right now, as this recording, boost with dive.
Yes. Yes. All the time, and do it
Yep.
when do it when it's good, not just to do it. Like
Yep.
tech, as you said, tech the first two boosts. Reading when he's committed too hard to a setup.
Yep. Yep. And I think I can also say most of the time you should boost with block. Tech
Okay.
hit, yes. And then parry is harder, it's trickier, right? But like parry, if successful, will give you some hand information. Or sorry, if unsuccessful, will give you some hand information.
Right.
Um, and if you're threatening reading, then he's probably going to be ditching his normals, and then he might draw different normals. Keep in mind, by the way, that if you see somebody's hand and then they get rid of it, you still have information about what's in their hand. It's just a probabilistic kind of information. You don't know
Right.
exactly what's in their hands.
Right.
Um,
Because
you know they took a big slice of their deck.
and they didn't have a chance yet to discard anything that they didn't want.
Yeah, right. Like that next hands is unfiltered, or at least much of it's unfiltered, whatever it is
Right.
that they've drawn.
Right.
So like you still have a window where reading is reasonably likely to work. Um, if you're able to parry out a dissolve, you're extremely happy. That's great. That there's enough unreliability in that, especially because he's going to be playing dissolves out of his hands pretty frequently. That he's not going to necessarily have a handful of them unless he happened to draw a handful of them and just
Right.
has another choice.
And later
Um,
on, when they're in his gauge, that becomes less valuable. It's harder to do it because he has three different copies with different names of the same boost, so you can't parry dissolve.
yeah,
You have to.
it's way more reliable to parry spin.
Right.
Um, because this is the boost that he'll be holding in reserve for when his dissolves hit his discard pile.
Right.
It's like if you want to parry dissolve, typically you'll parry the DP because that's the one he'll just play raw, or you will parry spin because it has rain blood on it.
Right.
But parry is good. If you don't have parry, as noted, you should be playing reading, you should be playing tech hit. If you are a season 6 character in particular, by the way, don't use mix up because you need spike. I definitely lost a game against Carmine because I, let my second spike drop and then nothing was threatening to him ever again.
Right. He didn't care
Um,
anymore.
yeah, it's like without access to something else that does the job of saying you can't play a sweep or a focus and be safe, then he will play a sweep and a focus and be safe, and then
Right.
you will lose
And you'll
because you can't
die.
trade up against him.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
hmm Um, that mostly covers it. Like the theory that would normally apply, where I'm still talking about a defensive set play character, which is what I classify Carmine as,
Yep.
is like a lot of characters who are rushdown characters are gonna be getting in your face all the time, and that's what you're doing. You're like to play this matchup, you want him not to have any time to set up. Um, it is borderline impossible to do that against Carmine because you get in his face a bunch. Eventually, he gets a turn. Now he has a setup, and now you probably can't break his setup.
Right.
And then eventually he will get outs. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
very very hard to do that.
I mean, this might be this might be sort of overstating it, but I'm not sure if it is. If you are a rushdown character who can consistently fight Carmine, who has the resources to consistently pressure Carmine, and the power to kill him in that opening salvo before he can get a setup up, you're probably also a banned character,
I
right?
was just thinking of Alice actually. Yeah, although
Exactly.
her power is a little low, but yes.
Yeah,
Um,
like if you can do this in the thing that you just described specifically, not the other setup and counterplay stuff that we were describing a second ago. If you can do this, you're probably also kind of a problem character.
yeah, because that means you can probably take any character in the game and kill them before they have a chance to react.
Right. Because Carmine doesn't need
Because
much chance here.
yeah, he doesn't need much chance, and he has unusually high effective life because he has so much armor,
Armor,
right?
sure. Yeah, so it
Um,
takes longer to kill him. That makes sense.
it takes longer to kill him, which buys him more time to
Right.
eventually draw the things that he needs.
Right. And he does, and
Um,
again, he doesn't need much.
he doesn't need much,
Okay. And then once he has it, he can do anything.
pretty much. I mean, he note that if you're watching, like if assuming somebody is running a standard Carmine line, which is what I'm describing here, what I say standard, sorry, my standard Carmine line, right? So I consider it standard. It's not necessarily universal. I don't want to use the word standard to mean that it's what everyone does.
Sure.
But anyway, somebody's running this Carmine that I've described. Then you as the opponent have a lot of information about what they're doing. This doesn't mean that you'll win, but still use that information.
Right.
I actually not too long ago played a game where it was an exhibition game where I played Carmine with my hand face up against a player who had never seen Carmine before, so that they could see everything that I was doing, every card that I set. Even when I set an attack, I set it face up.
Right.
Um, like you will not have that level of information, but like you if you know that he's only going to play things that are completely safe at all times, factor that in and do what you can, which is
Right.
not necessarily a lot, but do what
Right.
you can.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And good
Mhm.
luck. Both
Yeah,
both
and good luck.
as Carmine's opponent and also as the Carmine player. Um uh it, good luck. I
Yeah,
mean,
good luck
honestly,
and have fun.
yeah, good luck and have
Have fun.
fun. Like this character can be fun and should be played for fun. Just do it with an opponent who knows what Carmine can do and is okay with that. Please
Yes.
do not stomp a newbie with Carmine. Please do not turn them off the game by doing something unfair. But yeah, try to
Yeah.
have some fun with the game.
Yep. And don't be terrified of playing into this guy unless you really hate just losing no matter the context. Because like expecting to lose and then seeing how you can improve your play to refine your skills
Right.
is a thing that you can still do, right? Like if you manage to how do I put this? You're practicing on hard mode.
Sure.
Um if you play against Carmine and then try to develop the skills that will let you kill him, you will develop some very significant skills.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
And then you'll take off the weighted training clothing later, and you'll be an excellent Exceed player by the end of it.
there you go.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so look at it as an opportunity, or if you just enjoy the feeling of fighting a boss, right, where you want to be
Sure.
up against something that is imposing or overwhelming, then he will provide that half of that fantasy.
Sure. And
Um,
this is probably where we should leave it. This last thing, if someone is playing Carmine and you are salty about Carmine and all of his Carmineness, please do not take it out on them. I This is
oh
something that
yeah,
we have seen in the discords before, that Carmine is more than a top tier here. Probably he is a banned character, but when somebody is playing a very powerful character because they like them and they're playing for fun, they tend to get abused for that occasionally. Please be careful and remember that the person that you're playing is a human being.
yeah. Treat each other with respect and consideration, and acknowledge that like somebody liking a character that you don't like, no matter what the reason on either side, is not wrong. It doesn't make them a bad person.
Yeah,
Like there's a real human. Their feelings can still be hurt. Let people play the characters they love. If you don't want to play against the character, that's fine. Don't make other people feel bad for playing the character. Um,
exactly.
yeah, and I'm sure eventually we'll be able to talk a bit about other characters that you might have at your disposal if you decide you want to play a fairer fight against Carmine.
Oh yeah,
Um,
no. Stay tuned for when we discuss some of the other super powered characters of Exceed. I'm really looking forward to those lessons. But until then,
until
D,
then,
thank you so much for your time here and your expertise. I really really appreciate it. That was a wonderful lesson.
hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Got to talk about Exceed at great length for a while. That's a pretty easy sell for me.
Absolutely. And audience at home, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your time and your attention. I will see you all for the next one. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Oh, what can we sign out with? I have a specific sign out here.
Please.
You family friendly. This is the end.
This is the end. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.